Good evening. We call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Bristol, Virginia City Council today, Tuesday, January 11th, 2022. Please join us for a moment of silence. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you all for coming out tonight to our meeting. We've got a pretty packed agenda, and we're going to jump right in. The first item is council comments. Are there any comments from?
I do have one thing I wanted to mention. It is January 11th, but January the 9th was National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day, and just wanted to say, thank you to members of our police force and our sheriff's office for everything they do to protect the city every single day, whether it be something very big or something very small. We do greatly appreciate the work that they do.
And I would just like to say congratulations to Dr. Karen Shelton. You all probably read in the paper or saw where she was recently recognized as the Bristolian of the Year. She's the former director for the Virginia Department of Health, the Mount Rogers District, which covers this area, and led the efforts during the pandemic or during 2020 and 2021. She is now serving as the medical director for Bristol Regional Medical Center. I wanted to recognize her because I love also recognizing our own, and she's somebody that grew up in Bristol, Virginia, went to Virginia High, and so I'm really happy for her to be selected as the Bristol Herald Courier Bristolian of the Year.
The next item is city manager comments. Moving on to matters to be presented by members of the public. These are for non-agenda items. The first person who signed up for a non-agenda item, Mr. Michael Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. My name is Michael Pollard. I live at 140 Ashley Drive. My question concerns recycling. And I know that you aren't obligated to answer any questions that are posed at this point, but I would like to get an answer whether tonight or in the near future. I know this concerns a lot of other people as well, and that is simply whether you have a timeline to reopen the Lee Street Recycling Center. It's been closed for some time. The recently departed manager of Public Works said that he was working to resolve a trespassing wrongful possession issue on that property. But it's been some time now, and I was wondering if there was any foreseeable timeline to have that resolved. That's the only recycling area that's open 24 hours, and aside from the one by the ballpark. And right now I have to go to that side of town, and it'd be nice to have something that's a little more convenient, especially one that I have to go to every other week anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. The next item is the adoption of our agenda. What is the pleasure of the council?
I make a motion that we adopt the agenda with the following change. On section G, which is closed session, immediately following the section for personnel, we add a closed section for legal matters.
And council, I'll clarify those legal matters are for litigation in regards to Bristol, Tennessee.
Second the motion with the changes.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to adopt our agenda. Clerk, please call the roll.
Hartley?
Yes.
Nave?
Yes.
Osborne?
Yes.
Wingard?
Yes.
Farnham?
Yes. The first item of our regular agenda is landfill update, and there are a few folks that signed up for public comment on this item. First person is Mr. Stan Beringer. As you're coming up, I'll just remind everyone for the council chamber rules regarding public comment. Everyone gets 3 minutes to speak. If you would clearly in the microphone state your name and your address for the record. When you begin speaking, the green light will come on. When your time is almost up, the yellow light will come on. And when your time is up, the red light will come on. So we ask you to be courteous of your time and each other's. So, thank you.
Thank you, members of the council and city leadership. I appreciate your time. Thank you for your attention. I moved to Bristol, Tennessee from the Virginia side about 2.5 years ago. And my comments are fairly brief on this matter. I don't want to belabor the subject. I know that you've heard a lot about this already. But initially, when I moved to the Tennessee side of Bristol, the odors from the landfill were significant, but I considered them to be a nuisance. And now I'm noticing health effects, such as people have expressed widely to this council and in public forums. I was initially deeply skeptical that some of these health effects actually were widespread, but having experienced them myself, I can no longer deny that this issue needs to be resolved as quickly and expediently as possible. I appreciate all of your attention to the issue, but I felt like I needed to come forth and express my own experience on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person that signed up for public comment is Elizabeth Beringer.
Hello. Thank you, Council, for your time tonight. My name is Elizabeth Beringer. I live at 900 Pennsylvania Avenue in Bristol, Tennessee. I know you're all very aware of the experiences that the citizens of both sides of Bristol are experiencing from the landfill crisis. And I'm just here to represent some of the voices of the community members on a recent particularly bad day here last week. Just some comments that were made on our community Facebook group. The smell is the worst it's ever been up here on Ashley Drive. The smell is inside our house this morning. It's awful. My 3-year-old keeps coughing and sneezing, and I've had a horrible headache. It hurts to breathe right now. This is ridiculous and needs to stop. The beast is running wild in the halls and classrooms of the middle school this morning. I opened the door to a classroom and it smacked me in the face. I don't know how that teacher and her students stand it all day long, and that doesn't even begin to describe how it smells outside. It feels like broken glass in my left eye. My lips feel burnt. The left side of my face is tingly and numb feeling. I moved to Bristol 3 years ago because I love that place. There is so much there, business and life and things for kids. I love the time being there, and this dump and smell took over. I am an in-home nurse and work mostly on State Street and King College area. I've watched my clients have to leave their homes because it comes in the house. I've watched them have to be put in the hospital from headaches and nosebleeds and other respiratory problems. Just when I thought we were getting some relief, we are not. I'm forced to work through the stench in my very own home. Air purifiers are going on high with no relief yet. I can taste the smell in my mouth. We need help ASAP. We are dying over here. It's 2:30 in the morning. The nasty stench has woken me up. My whole house is filled with it. No room I can go in to escape it. I don't know if anyone is experiencing dry mouth from this, but I am, and it is extreme. I have a burning sensation in my chest. I have asthma, and it is making it hard for me to breathe. The smell from the dump is absolutely disgusting. My family has been praying for the people that live out in that horrid smell daily. Our heart goes out to everyone who has been through this. Last night, the smell got into our house and was awful. Then this morning, driving down King College to get our kids to school was enough to make everyone feel sick. This is insane and doesn't seem to be getting any better. We are really starting to regret our move here. And just on a personal level, this is the kinds of things that I'm experiencing in my own home. It's affecting every aspect of my life, my personal life, my health, my work. I don't feel like I have the energy to do anything. And I just urge you to please offer some relief to the citizens of Bristol. I appreciate what you've done to reach out for federal help, but it needs to be persistent and constant that you're asking for help for your citizens, because we're all really suffering. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person who signed up for public comment is Mr. Joel Kellogg.
Good evening, Council. So my name is Joel Kellogg. I live at 1204 Maryland Avenue, Bristol, Tennessee. Come here tonight speaking on behalf of our citizens group, Hope for Bristol. Last week, your city manager sent a letter to the EPA and the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality asking for their help with the Bristol, Virginia landfill. While we believe this request is a step in the right direction, we observe that it falls short of providing assistance to our community in the short term. Also, we fear the city may delay important actions needed in the long term as you await uncertain federal or state action in response to your letter. Hope for Bristol wishes to emphasize the serious impacts of the noxious gases emanating from the Bristol, Virginia landfill. Mild, moderate, and severe health impacts are experienced by residents daily and nightly. Our community is sheltering in place nearly every night. Our schools are invaded, and some children have nowhere safe to escape from the landfill gases. Many families have evacuated or have moved away entirely. We are well past a year into this ongoing crisis. It is beyond time that Bristol, Virginia City Council step up and participate in relief efforts to help residents suffering from your landfill. We ask tonight, what plans do you have to initiate such relief efforts? Second, it is clear from the city manager's letter last week that the landfill does not have a clear path to regulatory compliance. In fact, it is almost universally acknowledged that this landfill may never be in compliance with applicable regulations. Hope for Bristol firmly believes that this landfill must be closed and capped. The subsurface heating event, or fire in particular, must be contained rather than fueled with more trash. For this reason, we ask, what steps are you taking to reduce the intake of waste? When will you terminate current contracts with waste disposal companies and other municipalities? And finally, recent videos of the landfill indicate a large working face and poor cover across much of the landfill surface. Additionally, several gaps around the edges of the landfill are freely venting visible emissions into our community. Hope for Bristol's position is that the City of Bristol needs to begin adding that intermediate cover now that will form the base of a cap on this landfill. What plans does Bristol, Virginia have to begin trucking in soil and adding a significant cover to the entire landfill? What plans do you have to stop the smoke-like emissions from the edges of the landfill? In conclusion, we emphasize that it is not acceptable to wait for federal help without initiating the above steps in the meantime. Bristol, Virginia must move toward closure and begin relief efforts while requesting additional expertise and resources to help fix this environmental disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kellogg. The next person that signed up is Mr. Sam Weddington.
Sam Weddington, Senior Pastor, First Presbyterian Church, also a member of Bristol Area Ministerial Alliance, of which Jackie is a member as well. You're still president, right? Yeah, still president. Actually, I've come here tonight to do the thing I have not done to this point, and that's to compliment you. Thank you for writing the letter. You probably don't need my thanks, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. But I'm also going to challenge you, and you've already heard it. It is time to step up efforts on relief. I'm just going to let you know where I'm at. This week, I'm hoping that Eris is going to drop off 213 units. That'll be the 7th distribution, getting us up around 800 units. And I'm tapped, and I'm tired, and I don't know that I'm going to do another distribution. It's really taken a lot of my time, and I'm just exhausted from it. And so, again, I want to challenge you, step up and enter into that. At this point, I don't know that it's a liability issue with the letter going out any longer. There are partners, Eris and others, that you can enter into, get a good deal, and do the work. It's been a handful of us doing it to this point. And so I'm asking you, please take that step. I think also for some of those who are really severely affected on a daily basis, thinking about like vouchers for them to at least get one night out of the stench would be very helpful. And again, I want to challenge you on that point. And I do look forward to advocating actually with the city, with both cities, to get this thing closed. And if I can add in any way to the process of getting funding, federal or state or otherwise, I'm going to be working in that vein. So again, thank you, and I do challenge you. Please take part in the relief efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Weddington. That's the last person that signed up for public comment for this item. Staff report.
Council, just a quick update in regards to the landfill. Yesterday and today, Spec Rescue inspected the landfill wet well. The inspection provided the engineers and consultants with some good information about the wet well. At this point, 2 witness level monitoring pumps were replaced. 8 sleeves that were 325 each, it's 8 fabric sleeves, were pulled and removed from the wet well. That was part of an abandoned system, and we went ahead and removed that. Spec Rescue also verified the depths and widths of the wet well. That way, as we go through the benzene removal process, we'll be able to have a more clear idea of the amount of water and leachate that is in the wet well that we're pumping out, so we can design the system appropriately. At this time, we were unable to verify if there is a break in the weir wall. It may require another mobilization for us to go back down there and determine that. So that is something that we're still going to monitor. At this point, we cannot tell if the benzene is in the gradient or the leachate. Last week, City of Bristol, Virginia requested the EPA and DEQ to provide additional technical assistance to the city as it relates to the landfill. The City of Bristol, Virginia is seeking collaboration with the EPA and DEQ to help resolve this issue for our community. And the City of Bristol, Tennessee affectionately refers to Bristol, Virginia as its sister city. And we appreciate Bristol, Tennessee's letter to the EPA and DEQ. Communication and collaboration between our cities is critical to our success here in our community. As always, Bristol, Virginia is willing to collaborate with our neighbors across the state line at any time that they are willing to do so. The City of Bristol, Virginia will continue to address the issues at the landfill with or without federal or state assistance. It's our responsibility to fix this odor issue, and it's our intent to correct this odor issue as quickly as we can. However, it's our preference that federal and state assistance is sent to Bristol, Virginia in order to help us correct these issues. I do know, based on a conversation that I've had this past week, that the letter I have sent to the EPA and DEQ has reached some of the highest levels at the EPA. I do not have any official word at this time from the EPA or DEQ as to the steps that they will take or if they will take any steps. But it is my hope that we will know something shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Eads. The next item on our agenda, item 2, joint public hearing with the Planning Commission, zoning map amendment 02-2021 Island Road. I hereby open the hearing, and I ask Mr. Shu with the Planning Commission to open their hearing.
I hereby open the hearing for the Planning Commission.
Thank you. There is one person that signed up for public comment for this item, and that's Mr. Ron Wyatt.
Thank you, council members and fellow citizens. My name is Ron Wyatt. I live at 229 Steel Creek Road. That's next to this piece of property that they want to rezone. Presently, it's a single-family housing, and I personally think that's about all you could be able to put on there. This area, if you look at it, has a tremendous amount of wetlands that goes right along Steel Creek Road. If you're going to put 300 or 400 units of apartment complex around this, just the drainage runoff alone is going to ruin this wetland. That's not even talking about all the different animals that we have. We have deer. I have beavers. There's a beaver dam out there. There's all kinds of beautiful things in this area, and if they're going to take and destroy the drainage from here, this area drains from north of the interstate. It goes all the way to Steel Creek Park. You start damming these two places up and with all the drainage in it, it's going to cost a lot more to everyone in general, and the residents of Tennessee as well as Virginia. I just think this is the wrong thing to do, obviously. I retired 6 months ago. I moved up here in May to this beautiful place. I lived in Florida for the last, I can't tell you how old I am, but many years. And I retired, and I wanted to come to Bristol. This is a beautiful place, has a lot to offer, but please don't start tearing everything down that we have here that's natural resources. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wyatt. And the next part is staff comment.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the Planning Commission, thank you. Staff has received a request for a zoning map amendment, also known as a rezoning, for property located at the corner of Island Road and Steel Creek Road. As you can see up here on the slide, the star indicates where the property is. As you go to the south in Tennessee, the developer also owns that property as it goes all the way to West State Street. So this would be a two-state type of development. But we're obviously just looking at the area in Bristol, Virginia. There is no address for the property since it's vacant. The tax map parcels are 412A1 and 412A1A. The request is to rezone from R2, which is single and two-family residential, to R3, which is moderate density residential. The proposed use is for multifamily residential. We have not received any type of site plan or concept plans. They're not required for the rezoning process, but we are still discussing this with the property owner and the applicant. As I said earlier, the location is Island Road and Steel Creek Road. The item was advertised in the Bristol Herald Courier on December 27th, 2021 and January 3rd, 2022. Adjoining property owner notices were mailed on January 3rd, 2022, and a sign was placed on the property advertising the public hearing December 22nd. This item was recommended for a public hearing by the Planning Commission at the December 20th, 2021 meeting. After the public hearing, it will go to the Planning Commission at its regularly scheduled January 18th meeting next week, and then it would come for a yes or no recommendation. Then it would come back to the City Council at the next meeting, January 25th. So just on the slide, you can see the property location. There are 2 lots involved. They're approximately 12.5 acres. You can also see the property zoning is R2. Most of the adjoining property is either residential R2 or there's a little bit of business B1 up there, although most of those are residential properties. The historic land use for this property is vacant. Most of it's trees and brush as far as vegetation goes. These are a few of the pictures. It's a very large piece of property. It's difficult to get the whole thing for you, but looking from Island Road on the left and looking from Steel Creek Road on the right. We also have, this is the survey of the property. The area highlighted in yellow are the 2 lots that are being requested to be rezoned. As you can see, there's a very large area of flood zone A, otherwise known as the 100-year floodplain. It also has a little bit of flat area as it fronts Island Road, but then slopes very steeply up as it goes back towards Tennessee. There's not a lot of land of this 12.5 acres that could really be developed. So the largest parcel which is the only one that has any street frontage. Has approximately 1,000 feet of street frontage on Island Road and on Steel Creek Road. As I said before, it's heavily vegetated with a lot of floodplain. It's immediately south of I-81 and is accessed, can either be accessed from exit 1 via Gate City Highway or exit 74 from West State Street. Vehicular access to the property would be primarily from Island Road. Steel Creek Road is a very narrow, basically one-lane road with a weight-posted bridge as it goes from Virginia into Tennessee. And the property owner has indicated that he would most likely construct a new road across both the Virginia and Tennessee section of the property from West State Street to Island Road. The location of that road right now is unknown, but they would work with the city engineering department as far as figuring out the best location and all of their approvals. The existing uses in this area are primarily residential, both in Virginia and Tennessee. The Interstate 81 Welcome Center is located across Island Road right off 81. The property, since it's in the south, is vacant, which is destined to be part of this development as well. And like I said, you have homes to pretty much the rest of the surrounding area. Although there are single-family homes adjoining the property to the east, the location immediately next to the interstate may not be conducive to the expansion of single or two-family residential homes. The property has been vacant for many years with no expansion of residential use that has been proposed in the past. The establishment of a multifamily district in this location could be seen as a transitional or buffer zone between lower density residential and commercial districts. Consistency with the 2017 comprehensive plan. The 2017 plan does not specifically address this area of the city. However, Objective 5 of the Residential Area Framework Plan states that the city should encourage and support the development of diversity of new housing product at a variety of price points and sizes. The future land use map shows the property as single-family detached, but as stated earlier in the document, the presence of 81 may not be conducive to single-family residential. The topography in the flood zone will also discourage any type of residential development that cannot be clustered, such as apartment or townhouse development. That is not allowed in an R2 district. As far as the impacts, my comments from other staff members. For traffic, the proposed use of the property will increase the traffic on Island Road. It's difficult to estimate how much without an accurate projection of the number of housing units. Our transportation planner commented that on average, an apartment use generates approximately 6 trips per day, with half entering and half exiting. Therefore, the new road that would be constructed would give them another way in and out, either between Island Road in Virginia or West State Street in Tennessee. Once the more detailed site plan is submitted, the engineering department could request a traffic impact analysis if they choose. Natural resources, the city will require all environmental related permitting to be obtained and approved prior to development, including soil and erosion control, stormwater management. The school system for public facilities should have a minimal impact on the local school system, depending on the number of units constructed and whether the people who move into them are already Bristol, Virginia residents and have kids in their school system, or if they come from outside the area. So it could be a little bit higher or very little at all. It should not affect the local parks and recreation facilities. I have a comment from Fire Marshal Eric Blevins on emergency services. Development under either use group at this location would create an equal need for infrastructure development in this area, so that zoning change would be acceptable. Presently, the closest hydrant is near 645 Island Road, with no hydrants on the Virginia section of Steel Creek Road. Water, wastewater, and electrical utilities. Philip King from BVU offered the following comment. BVU has no wastewater service available to the property. Wastewater services will need to utilize the City of Bristol, Tennessee infrastructure. The developer should work with BVU and the City of Bristol, Tennessee to ensure that the property can be served. Public transit will not be affected since there is not currently a transit route in this area. And there should be a negligible impact on the provision of other government services. Garbage collection services will be addressed during the site plan review process. No comments were offered from the police department. Neither the city engineer nor the building official had comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. So I'll hereby close the hearing for this item, and I'll ask the Planning Commission to close their hearing as well.
I hereby close the hearing for this item on the Planning Commission side.
Thank you, Mr. Shu. The next item is joint public hearing with the Planning Commission, Zoning Map Amendment 03-2021-2016 Veda Drive. I hereby open our hearing, and I ask the Planning Commission to open their hearing for this item as well.
I hereby open the meeting to the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Shu. We had one person who signed up for public comment for this item, and that is Michael Pollard.
I had my leg crossed, my foot fell asleep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council and the Planning Commission. My name is Michael Pollard. I live at 140 Ashley Drive. The location looks good for a hotel, looks rather appropriate if it's handled appropriately. But we don't want customers for a hotel going through a residential subdivision, either to get to the hotel or by mistake. And today's topic is not plat approval, but zoning. In addition, the proposed zone, B3, has a lot of uses that wouldn't be appropriate for the entrance to a subdivision. I might suggest, because I like alternatives, that the location may be granted a special exception with conditions rather than a rezoning, or else a rezoning with similar conditions, though that's something that an approach that's taken less often. Specifically, that the paved portions of the property must not connect to the residential roads, and a substantive buffer must be installed that blocks light and sound from the ground floor and that provides physical security, since, as of yet, a landscape ordinance is not yet in place. The Planning Commission is working on a landscape ordinance. They were starting that process when I was on the Planning Commission, but it's not yet in place. And with this current proposal as it is, since the draft plat has no obligation whatsoever, I would be concerned that this may pose, especially considering it's a blanket rezoning to B3, that it may pose a risk to the nearby residents. This property is on the comprehensive plan for business use, but that's a long-term plan, not something necessarily for the next couple of years. And right now, there are still a lot of residents there that could be put at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. Staff report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of Planning Commission. Staff has received a zoning map amendment request for 2016 Veda Drive. The proposal is to rezone the property from R2, which is single and two-family residential, to B3, general business district. As you can see, the location of the property is at the corner of Gate City Highway and Veda Drive, and it backs up to the future casino property. The proposed use is for a hotel. The item was advertised in the Bristol Herald Courier December 27th, 21, and January 3rd, 22. Adjoining property owner notices were mailed on January 3rd, 22, and a sign was placed on the property on December 22nd, 2021. The Planning Commission recommended this item for a public hearing at their December 20th, 21 meeting. It will be considered again at the January 18th meeting for a yes or no recommendation to the council, and then we'll come back to the City Council at its January 25th meeting for an approval. There have been no previous zoning map amendments requests for this property to the knowledge of city staff. The existing land use is single-family residential, and the existing zoning designation is R2. The request is to amend the zoning to B3 General Business District. The site is 2 parcels and is roughly 0.385 acres. There's some trees and grass on the property right now along with the house. And as stated before, the owner does intend to use the property to construct a hotel. The slide on the left are the 2 parcels that are being considered. As you see, they do front both Gate City Highway and Veda Drive. The zoning map is on the right. The majority of the area on Gate City Highway is Zone B3, at least those parcels that front Gate City Highway, with the exception of the old Flavor Ridge plant, which is manufacturing. And then you have the Veda Drive and Everett Street areas, which are still residential. The photo on the left is looking across from Gate City Highway to the property, and the one on the right is across Veda Drive. This is the survey of the property, and they've got a rough sketch in of where the hotel would be located. So I'm going to go back here. The property has 138 linear feet of road frontage on Gate City Highway and approximately 100 feet of road frontage on Veda Drive. It currently has a single-family residence, and as stated before, it is adjacent to the future Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. Vehicular access to the property is from Veda Drive via Gate City Highway. The current driveway is accessed by Veda Drive. The existing uses bordering the subject are residential to the southwest, the future casino to the southeast, office use to the northwest, and there's a bank across Gate City Highway to the northeast. The entire area is a mix of residential and commercial uses. Sorry. Although there are some single and 2-family homes on Veda Drive and neighboring Everett Street, the majority of the land uses in this area are commercial. Easy access and proximity to I-81 are features that make the subject property appropriate for commercial development. The majority of the property, as I stated earlier, along Gate City Highway is zoned commercially. Consistency with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan addresses future development of the former Bristol Mall site. However, a casino was not in the works when this plan was approved in 2017. Just for information purposes, the comprehensive plan is due for an update this year, so that is one of those things that will be included. Objective number 1 of the Commercial and Employment Area Framework Plan encourages promotion of commercial reinvestment along Gate City Highway. Objective number 5 encourages leveraging Bristol's many unique assets to increase tourism and visitors to the city. The future land use map shows this property as being regional commercial. The land use designation is to encourage establishments that draw from a regional consumer traveling along I-81 as opposed to the local commercial land use category. Staff comments on the impacts of the rezoning. The proposed use of the hotel will increase traffic in the area. Our transportation planner offered the following comment. On average, a hotel will generate 10 vehicle trips per occupied room per day. Half of these will be entering and half exiting. If the proposed hotel has all 30 rooms occupied, then traffic can expect to increase by 150 trips in and out per day. Traffic volume is not generated by this request is not anticipated to be a problem, as Gate City Highway right now is running well below capacity. However, future traffic with the addition of the casino and other associated businesses is certain to increase this. A traffic impact analysis is scheduled to be performed for the Gate City Highway corridor, which would also include I-81, exits 1, 3, and 74, going all the way out to the intersection of Gate City Highway, Euclid, and West State Street within the next 12 months. This will tell us a lot about what type of improvements will need to be made in that area to prepare for the casino and all the other businesses that will most likely pop up around it. As far as natural resources go, city staff will require all environmental related permitting to be obtained and approved prior to development, including soil and erosion and stormwater management. Public facilities, it should have no impact on the local school system, should have no impact on the local parks and recreation system. Eric Blevins, our fire marshal, offered the following comments for emergency services. Presently, the closest hydrant is on the mall casino site, and another hydrant is located across the road at the intersection of Gate City Highway and Osborne Street. Hydrant distances would be acceptable, and hydrant flow rates would be acceptable for the zoning change. If a sprinkler system other than a residential system is required, a supply hydrant would be needed within 100 feet of fire department connection, but that would be consistent no matter what the zoning classification is. As this is the corner lot at the start of an area with multiple businesses on both sides of the street, the road access would be acceptable, and the zoning change would be acceptable. Wastewater, and electrical utilities, Philip King of BVU offered the following comments. A sanitary sewer capacity analysis will have to be conducted prior to the construction of the hotel. The developer is responsible for all costs associated with the study. The developer will be responsible for the costs associated with any upgrades to the water, wastewater, and electric system infrastructure needed to serve the proposed development. Currently, public transit does not serve this far out, so it should have no impact on transit. Government services, garbage collection services will be addressed during the site plan review process. No comments were offered from police. Neither the city engineer nor the building official had comments, except that the city will have to keep in mind access management and entrance locations as development progresses. And the property owner or the applicant is here and would like to do just a short presentation as well, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, they can go ahead and come on up. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bill Huber. I'm here representing the developer. I'm an architect who was commissioned to evaluate the suitability of this site for a variety of uses. And after that bit of studying, the owner decided that a hotel, a small boutique hotel, was the best use of the property. So what you're seeing here is the situation of the building on the site. 30 parking spaces fitting onto this site is the challenge, obviously. And so this is a 4-story building as proposed with underground parking. Next slide, please. So you can see there are about 15 to 18 parking spaces above grade, and then the remainder will be below grade. Most of those underneath the building footprint itself. Next. So this is the below grade parking. So it's effectively a parking garage underneath the lowest level of the hotel. Next, please. So these are some conceptual drawings just to help to understand the scale of the project, the volume of the project on the site. This is looking from the southeast. Veda is in the background there, and Gate City is coming towards you, Gate City Highway. Next. And then this is another shot a little further around to the south. What you're seeing in the foreground there is the entrance to the future casino. You can see the access to the parking garage on the lower side of the building. This is coming into town on Gate City Highway. The building in the background is the former automotive building for Sears. Okay, is that it?
Yep.
Yep, okay. Any questions?
Thank you. We appreciate you coming here tonight.
You're welcome.
I do want to make one more comment. If the property is rezoned and a commercial business is allowed to be constructed there, there would be a requirement for screening between the commercial use and the residential properties.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. I hereby close the hearing for this item, and I'll ask the Planning Commission to do the same.
I hereby close the meeting for this item for the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Shu.
Thank you.
The next item of our agenda is joint public hearing with the Planning Commission, creation of a short-term rental ordinance. I hereby open our hearing, and I ask the Planning Commission to do the same.
I open the hearing for the Planning Commission. Thank you.
We had one person that signed up for public comment for this item, and that is Michael Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and the members of the City Council and Planning Commission. My name is Michael Pollard. I live at 140 Ashley Drive. It seems the proposal isn't as complicated as it could be, and I was glad to see that. But it does call for all applicants to obtain a business license. And I would be concerned about complications that may bring, such as regular filings that may be due regardless of any rentals during the period. The applicant must complete an application with an annual fee anyway, and I'd argue that the additional license is excessive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. Staff report.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the Planning Commission. Based on input that we, staff, has been receiving from members of the public, basically a lot of phone calls that we have received, people asking what type of regulations, what do they need to do to either open an Airbnb, or on the flip side, we've had lots of calls about complaints about Airbnbs. And as we have no ordinance to regulate this, we went to the Planning Commission to discuss this. They appointed a 2-member subcommittee to work with staff, and these are the types of things that we've come up with. So there's just a little background on this. Just to get this out of the way, the item was advertised in the Bristol Herald Courier, December 27th, 21, and January 3rd, 22. The Planning Commission voted to recommend it for a public hearing at their December 20th, 21 meeting. It will go back to the Planning Commission at their January 18th regular meeting for a yes or no recommendation to council, and it will come back to the City Council at the January 25th meeting for final approval. So just a real brief look at it. Virginia Code basically gives a definition for the short-term rentals. And when we say short-term rentals, we're talking about any type of rental that could be offered on a hosting platform, such as VRBO, Airbnb, or any potential hosting platform like that. It's not just for one or the other, but it's for anything like that. A short-term rental is a space for occupancy for dwelling, sleeping, or lodging purposes for a period of fewer than 30 consecutive days in exchange for a charge. Virginia Code also allows a locality by ordinance to establish a short-term rental registry and require operators within the locality to register annually. A locality may charge a reasonable fee for such registration related to the actual cost of establishing and maintaining the registry, and the code does allow for penalties if operators do not register. Virginia Code basically also says that besides the registry, the locality has a lot of leeway when it comes to making up their own ordinance. So there's very little to go on as far as what the guidance of the code, except for the fact that the tax purposes. So the city did do some research for some neighboring localities, other localities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We did look at Bristol, Tennessee, and some of the other Tri-Cities. None of the Tri-Cities have any type of ordinance regulating short-term rentals, but they also have a different state mandate. They don't necessarily fall under the same types of regulations that we would. So what came about for our regulations? I'll just run through these real quick. So there would be a registration and application process. It'd be $25 fee per unit. Only the owner of the property can operate the rental. A business license would be required, and that was at the request of the Commissioner of Revenue's office. Homeowner's insurance would be required with a $1 million liability insurance policy attached. If the property is in a homeowners association, they would have to give permission to operate the Airbnb or short-term rental, sorry. Owners could operate 10 units throughout the city by right. Any additional units would be required to have a special use permit. The reason we wanted to do this is so that somebody doesn't come up and buy 40 units in a townhouse complex and just use them all just for short-term rentals, and then it makes it even more difficult for people to find places to live. Have to have a minimum of 1 off-street parking space. Could only have 1 booking per residential unit at a time. So you could have the occupancy rate of 2 persons per bedroom, but you couldn't like book 1 room to 1 group and book another room to another group, just 1 at a time. Smoke detectors, fire extinguisher, carbon monoxide detectors would be required. Accessory structures cannot be used unless they are accessory dwelling units, and RVs would not be able to be used for rentals. There would be no advertising signage allowed on the site. The name and telephone number of the operator should be posted in the rental unit, and the operator is responsible for any and all maintenance, problems, etc. Certification of these regulations would be through an application process, and the city would reserve the right to inspect the property if necessary. I did have a discussion today with the inspections department, and they believe that there should be a, when the application is started, just a quick safety inspection of the Airbnb or the short-term rental unit. So that is something that I will discuss with the Planning Commission at the next meeting, and if that is something that we want to put in there, we'll go ahead and add that for the next meeting. There is a section on suspension or cancellation of registration, where if the operator fails to pay taxes or has substantiated complaints, a substantiated complaint would be a call from a neighbor to the police department or to the Office of Community Development and Planning. It would have to be an actual formal complaint. Monetary penalties in the amount of $250 to $500 may occur, or the cancellation of the registration. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I hereby close our hearing for this item, and I ask the Planning Commission to do the same.
I hereby close the meeting for this item for the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Shu. The next item is joint public hearing with the Planning Commission, update to City Code Section 50-242, definitions, and Section 50-323, permitted uses in a B3 district. I hereby open our hearing, and I ask the Planning Commission to do the same.
I hereby open our hearing for the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. We had one person sign up for public comment for this item, Michael Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, and members of the Planning Commission. I guess for public disclosure, my name is Michael Pollard. I live at 140 Ashley Drive. As with many things, there are 2 sides. Virginia is allowing more and more legal uses of cannabis. The proposal would only allow a business like Dharma Pharma to move back into the city without a special exception. And any dispensary must be at least partly owned by the processor, so the change seems to have little benefit. On the other hand, the state and the Board of Pharmacy could decide to open up licensure more broadly, as they have already done with non-THC products. In that situation, the City Council and Planning Commission needs to bear in mind, as Nancy Marnie would point out, that any uses allowed will be allowed in any B3 zone anywhere in the city, with a few minor exceptions, such as the 1,000-foot limit from a school or a daycare. And those permitted locations would include the proposed rezoning at the entrance to Veda Drive. So this could open up a can of worms that you're not expecting. So you just need to be careful with the details. Right now, it would seem extremely limited in its benefit, but with a minor change at the state level, we could wind up with complications that we don't expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. Staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the Planning Commission. On July 1st, 2020, Virginia authorized the use of medical marijuana in the Commonwealth. Pharmaceutical processors were established as the official cannabis providers. Processors are the licensed facilities that grow, extract, and dispense the products. Dharma Pharmaceuticals, which was located in Bristol and now is located in Abingdon, is the licensed processor in our area. Virginia will allow one processor per health service area. As you can see, we're in Health Service Area 3, which is a very large geographic area that goes from Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina. It also includes Lynchburg, Roanoke, Danville. So there's a lot of area in our health service area that we are kind of looking at here. In addition to the pharmaceutical processors, the legislation also allowed for up to 5 cannabis dispensing facilities per HSA. The cannabis dispensing facility is where someone would pick up their medical marijuana with a medical cannabis card issued by the Board of Pharmacy. Cards are issued to individuals by physicians who have registered in the Commonwealth to participate in the program. The dispensing facility would operate very similar to a pharmacy. The patient would show the required documents, and then they would pick up their prescription. Currently, there is no definition or designated zoning district for either the pharmaceutical processor or cannabis dispensing facility. Currently, if a facility wanted to locate into Bristol, they would ask the Planning Commission for a similar use determination, most likely using a medical office or a pharmacy as the similar use. Medical officers and pharmacies are currently allowed in all non-residential districts, B1, B2, and all of your manufacturing districts as well. Looking ahead a couple of years, in 2024, right now, legislation is proposed to be passed to allow recreational marijuana to start being sold in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's possible that a cannabis dispensing facility, which is, in the medical marijuana business, would expand its operation to recreational marijuana when this becomes legal in 2024. And if this does take place, then we would like to be able to make sure we can regulate where those recreational facilities are. If we let one in just anywhere now for a medical marijuana, they might change to the recreational marijuana, and it might be located somewhere that we're not really ready for it to be. So that's kind of why we're starting to look ahead at this already. In 2024, there would be 400 statewide recreational marijuana licenses granted. So you do have more urban areas of the Commonwealth, Northern Virginia, Richmond, Tidewater area that would probably have a lot of those, but I would, there will most likely be some in this area as well. So adding a definition for these types of facilities to our code, as well as a location, would allow the city to better control future development of these dispensaries. So what this would do is insert two definitions into the city code, one for cannabis dispensing facility and one for pharmaceutical processor. Both of these definitions were taken straight from the state code. Where we would like to have these listed or permitted by right would be in a B3, which is our general business district. We would also think that these would be better served to be at least 1,000 feet door to door from all public or private schools, as well as 1,000 feet door to door from daycare facilities. And, sorry, wrong way. This is just kind of a really rough scale of the circle areas are schools or daycare facilities which are located close to B3 or in B3 districts. So that's kind of a buffer zone of where a medical marijuana facility would not be allowed to locate. Of course, the one there on the west end where Stonewall Jackson, depending on what happens with the school, could stay or not. But these are by no means all of the local daycare or schools, but like I said, these are the only ones that are within 1,000 feet of a B3. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Just to clarify, you said a B3 is essentially the darker red
Yes,
shading.
the B3 is the dark red on there. It's our general business district, the Exit 7 area, the Falls, up and down Euclid Avenue and Gate City Highway primarily.
Okay. All right, thank you, Jay. So I hereby close our hearing, and I ask the Planning Commission to close their hearing as well.
Hereby close the hearing for the Planning Commission. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Before moving on to the next item, we will take a quick 5-minute recess. We'll reconvene shortly. Thank you. Okay. The next item of our agenda is consideration of funding approach for a new intermediate school. Nobody signed up for public comment for this item. Staff report.
Council, tonight you have before you Dr. Keith Perrigan and Roland Cooch with Davenport and Company. I think Dr. Perrigan's going to present first, and then Mr. Cooch will follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Eads. Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, it's my pleasure tonight. This has been a very long process, and it feels really good to get here to the end and to be bringing you not one but multiple funding options for building a new school. I will let you know that the financer who has put together the plan for the PPA with the street team is on Zoom tonight, so if you do have questions that I don't answer in the presentation, they will be available to answer your questions. Also, I'll let you know, I laid something at your seat there. The information that you had to look at over the weekend, some of that has changed. And so I'll share that, and I'm sure Mr. Cooch will share that in his presentation as well, but wanted you to have access to that information as well. So with that, just as a reminder, in 2018, our school board approved the comprehensive agreement, October of 2018. City Council then approved the comprehensive agreement to build a new intermediate school on December 10th of 2019. You'll remember that we put it on pause there in early 2020, but then our board reactivated the comprehensive agreement in 2021. So just so you know, tonight's decision is not whether we're going to build a new school or where we're going to build a new school. City Council has already voted on that in December of 2019. Tonight's decision is just to consider a finance plan or plans. So to give you a brief update, J Street has provided a guaranteed maximum price. I'll share that information with you in a minute. The PPEA financer has also provided a draft finance summary for council approval. You saw some documents related to that if you looked over the agenda over the weekend. The city's financial advisor has also suggested an alternate finance plan or plans, and you'll hear more about that. Just keep in mind that the final numbers for either option won't be known until they're put out for bid. So these, I don't anticipate, nobody anticipates that the numbers will change very much at all. But in order to find out what the final numbers are, they actually have to go out to bid. So these numbers will be very close to what the final numbers end up being. So just to give you a summary of what the lease finance plan looks like from the PPA version, or the PPA version of the finance plan. So VanPelt Elementary School and Suncrest Park, they lie in an opportunity zone. And so the investors will take advantage of that, and a qualified opportunity zone fund will be formed, and that will then fund a qualified opportunity zone business, which will contract with J.A. Street to construct a new school on that property. The city, and if you'll remember this, this has been the model all along, the city will lease the property, a ground lease, to the opportunity zone business for 51 and a half years, but the accrual feature of that lease will actually expire after 31 and a half years, which a year and a half to build and then 30 years of making payments on the building. The opportunity zone business will make improvements, in other words, a new school on the land, and then lease those improvements back to the school board for 30 years, with the first payment being due in August of 2023, which means that there's no payment due with this model during the construction of the new school. And so the guaranteed maximum price that we have is $20,844,000. The interest rate with this plan is at 4%. The annual lease payment will be $1.28 million. Actually, if you'll remember when I presented to you in November, that's actually a little over $80,000 better than what we thought the annual payment would be. So we saw an improvement there. And then there's going to be an expected increase in the guaranteed maximum price of about $2 million if the opportunity zone option is not available. I'll tell you more about that here in just one second. First of all, I think it's important to understand what an opportunity zone is, and this definition comes directly from the IRS's website. Opportunity zones is an economic development tool that allows people to invest in distressed areas in the United States. Their purpose is to spur economic growth and job creation in low-income communities while providing tax benefits to investors. And Bristol has designated opportunity zones, and VanPelt and Suncrest Park just happen to be in one of those. By using the lease finance plan, the developer will actually receive an enhanced tax deduction from the accrued ground rent and interest and no capital gains. These benefits increase the developer's equity return dramatically. And so that return allows the developer to charge a lower GMP than if he didn't have that opportunity. So this plan, what it ends up doing is leveraging federal benefits at the local level. And so that is the summary, and you have a more in-depth summary of the finance plan that was shared with you over the weekend. But the alternate finance plan, which you'll hear more about from Mr. Cooch, it's unclear whether or not the opportunity zone can be leveraged in that model. And so if it can't be, the guaranteed maximum price goes up by $2 million. However, with the alternate plan that you'll see, the interest rate is better, and so the annual payment would, even with the $2 million increase in the guaranteed maximum price, the annual payment would be slightly better. However, more risk does rest with the city compared to the street finance plan. The investors are taking on a majority of the risk in the lease plan. And then payments will also begin during construction instead of after the keys are turned over to the school system. So those are some differences, and I know Mr. Cooch will share some others as well. Keep in mind, help is on the way. The Commission on School Construction and Modernization has issued a bipartisan recommendation to provide state support for school construction. 3 of those bills have already been entered, and you can see those in the portal. Delegate O'Quinn he's entered 2. They're not in the portal yet, but he's submitted 2 pieces of legislation on school construction. One that would have an annual school construction grant that school divisions could take advantage of to help offset the cost of those payments. And the other is if you use a unique financing model like the finance plan the street team is offering, that a portion of that would count towards your contribution to required local effort. Whereas now, any debt service that you put out there does not count towards required local effort. So if either of those bills are passed, it would definitely help out as we're trying to pay for the new school over the next 30 years. Governor Northam, as he left out the budget that he has left for the General Assembly to consider, we have $1.8 million that Bristol, Virginia will receive, and we can use that money to put a down payment on the new school as well. Governor-elect Youngkin has also promised to make school construction a priority for his administration. So we know it's been a while. It's been since 2009 since the state has provided any additional help for school construction or capital needs, but it looks like that we're going to get there this year. I will remind you as I wrap up, only one school division in the Commonwealth has buildings with a median age older than our schools. If you look at just the averages, Bristol ranks 4th with having the oldest schools with an average age of 72. And if you look at it the other way, how long has it been since a locality built a school? Only 10 other localities have waited longer to build a new school than we have, and that's been 47 years. Obviously, that was at VanPelt. Keep in mind, that's out of 132 school divisions. So I do have a recommendation for a motion. Mr. Eads may offer addendums to this, but this is the motion that I would recommend that council approves tonight after you've heard both plans. This would enable us to put both of the finance plans out on the street to get bids. We would get those back by late February so that whichever plan ended up being better and city council went with, the street team could go ahead and get to work and start moving dirt at VanPelt and Suncrest Park in early March. So that is my presentation. We've talked about this for about 4 years now, and it feels really good to be close to the end. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I don't know, Mr. Reeves, if you want Mr. Cooch to do his before, or if they want to ask questions of the finance.
I'll leave it up to council, but I think it'd probably be wise to hear from Mr. Cooch first.
That sounds good.
Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Berrigan and Randy, City Manager Randall Eads, Tamara, and members of council. I'm going to be speaking tonight not only on this issue, but also another issue which we've come before City Council on multiple occasions in terms of refinancing debt for savings purposes.
And just to,
that one as well.
Just to throw this out there, a couple items down on our agenda is a discussion about the refunding opportunities.
That's the second topic.
So maybe we can hold off on that until later item, and we'll hit the school item.
I just wanted to just say I'm going to speak to you twice. The first one is on the schools, and a little bit of background just before I get into the presentation, and if we could have the big book presentation put up there, then I'll go into that. My name is Roland Cooch. I've been with Davenport & Company for easily since 1998, over 20 years. I've been in the business for over 25 years as a registered municipal advisor. We've been working with the City of Bristol for over 2 decades. As the fiduciary to the City of Bristol, as your advisor, we don't have any preferences or biases one way or the other from a financing perspective. What we do is we help the city not only enhance its credit ratings, get the best credit ratings it can possibly do, but also access funding, capital funding in the most cost-effective manner, depending on the projects that are underway or under consideration. So we really have no bias one way or the other in terms of the funding approach. The school's a great idea. When we first saw this a couple of years ago, we did see the finance plan. It was a little more nebulous at that time in terms of trying to decipher what it was, but I think in what you'll see tonight is we've been able to analyze the proposed financing plan under the PPA approach. And a PPA approach has been undertaken by many localities throughout the Commonwealth. The PPA not only allows you to do the design build with a contractor, but the financing comes along with it. Most oftentimes that we've seen in almost all publicly undertaken PPAs, the locality has the ability to control the financing by itself and dictate its own terms and conditions. And most often that we do see is that the publicly sourced financing becomes the cheapest financing available. And I think you'll see that in our numbers tonight. Some of the background here, as we've heard, The Bristol City Schools has got the proposal for funding the new intermediate school. We understand the GMP price is $22.8 million, just rounded it here to about $23 million. Financing's a challenge, and we know that. The City of Bristol has limited legal debt margin for issuing general obligation bonds. If we had our druthers, we'd say, let's undertake the school, let's do the city's ratings, get the ratings on GO bonds, and just issue a GO bond issue. That's the cheapest and most cost-effective funding, governmental tax-exempt funding that you can get. However, there's not a sufficient amount of legal debt margin for a material amount of investment in a new school. So rather, the funding for this school would need to take some form of lease or appropriation-based financing. That's a simple way of saying that the school, that type of debt would be subject to appropriation. That type of debt is undertaken in the Commonwealth for public facilities 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 10, for governmental facilities, routinely undertaken in the Commonwealth. Most often, it's undertaken through an industrial development authority or an economic development authority as the conduit. And that's a perfectly acceptable conduit and under legal statutes under the Commonwealth of Virginia law. Background here also is that the city also enjoys strong investment grade ratings. As the stewards of city council here over the past 5 to 10 years plus, and especially with Randall Eads and his team over the past several years when they've joined the city, they've worked really hard, and the city council's worked really hard to improve these ratings and improve the financial standing of the city. And now it has the strongest investment grade ratings that it's had in well over 20 years, A3, A+. And that's A3 by Moody's, A+ by Standard & Poor's. And this is in part is a couple of bullets here, recent track record of structurally balanced budgets, coupled with meeting and or exceeding self-imposed financial policy guidelines. So it's very commendable to the city council and to city staff. In addition, the economic renaissance is also a boost to the city's credit ratings as well. With these ratings at these levels, the city has the potential for debt issuance for the new intermediate school to be well received in the marketplace. And we're talking about not GO, but the subject to appropriation debt. And what we've done is our specialty and what we do is we advise local governments on not only structuring and facilitating debt, but capital planning. So this is in our wheelhouse, and we do this day in and day out. So our funding approach seeks to take advantage of all these capabilities that the city has access to at the governmental side. The planned new intermediate school. The school board seeking to utilize this PPA legislation, as we talked about, enter into a GMP with a developer for a fixed price contract to do this. And we understand it's $22.8 million if it's got the opportunity zone structure is layered upon it, and that's a very complicated structure. It's not something that a few bullet points on one page will do. It's very complicated. Now, the other side of the coin is if the opportunity zone is not undertaken, we understand that cost goes up $2 million. It goes from 22.8 to 24.8. And I'll show you the numbers and how they all pan out. But we'll take a look at that here in the next couple of pages. In addition, the school board's in a position to leverage federal and or state funding for the project. That's ESSER grants, that's related to the American Reinvestment in Public, ARPA Act. That's on both sides of the equation. You can apply them on both sides of the equation. So as a part of this PPA approach, the developers brought on a financing team and a financing mechanism with this opportunity zone to not only provide the construction, but also the financing for the project. And what we're doing here is we're not speaking or opining to the quality of construction, the size of the contract, the cost of the school, just the element of putting the financing in place under this approach. Based on a review of the proposal and preliminary costs that we're talking about, the comparisons, we believe that the city and schools can save several $1 million in terms of interest and financing costs undergoing what we're calling a competitive process. That is to say, we, the city, control the debt issuance. It's going to be open to the public markets. The same investors that have the ability to invest in the Opportunity Zone can bring their money to the table to the city's debt issuance as well. The same insurance companies, the same institutional investors, as well as retail investors and that like. This is the public markets and a public issuance. So the city is done with its GO bonds, but we're talking about subject to appropriation debt. So specifically, what we are, and as I've said, we're the fiduciary to the city. We're indifferent to either approach. We're just looking at the mechanics and the bottom line. What does this cost the city? What is involved on this? So back to mentioning what the proposed developer PPA financing is. As we look at this, the key attributes is it's utilizing this opportunity zone to establish an opportunity zone to take advantage of federal tax credits and federal tax statuses with this type of mechanism. What this means is that essentially the developer is the borrower that he's passing along in terms of the loan. The developer's the borrower on this and is passing that cost, and you're making the payment on that cost. That loan is going to be a taxable loan. Now, what we're talking about on the city side is a tax-exempt loan. Now, there's cost differential in terms of the cost of the project, so we've got to take that into account. The PPA is non-rated, would be privately placed with investors based on their assessment of the city's credit. So it's really a pass-through through the developer, but they're looking to the city to make the repayments. The established interest rate, as I said, is about 4%. It's based on a taxable rate plus a spread, and those rates have been trending up. So the last when we looked at this, it was in the 4% range. What's also an important aspect of this is that in this loan, the city essentially would not have any rights to refinance for economic savings purposes. What I'm going to speak about and alluded to at my second topic is the ability to refinance some existing debt and save millions of dollars. Similar in the way that last year we refinanced some debt and saved millions of dollars as well. So you're giving up, the city would be giving up the ability to refinance that debt at a future rate, at a future date for savings purposes. It's a potential opportunity cost to think about when looking at that financing. The developers' consultants have indicated that the PPA financing costs do not count towards the legal debt margin. That is true. Also, subject to appropriation debt that we're talking about that the city would undertake has the exact same attribute. That is true as well. So neither approach would count towards the legal debt margin and impact that GO legal debt margin. One part of this, and what you'll see is we've consolidated it for presentation purposes, is the largest part of this financing is in fact a lease or a loan that's repaid over 30 years, that's built into the payments back to the investors and kind of repayment of the city's total debt service. Sort of, what is my total payment? What is my mortgage, so to speak? What's also in this is that there's the developer putting in an equity investment. But think about that from the perspective of that's not free money. That is in fact developer financing that he's going to get paid back in addition to the big part of the lease. There's really two components of this PPA financing. When you put it all together, the financing results in a consolidated debt payment or lease payment, effectively all in. And that's what we're looking at here. This $2.5 million of additional equity investment, which kind of serves as effectively, from your perspective, a loan, a developer loan, the repayment of that 2.5 over 30 years, effectively with interest, is $3.9 million. So we have to take that into account in the overall economics as well, which we have done. So with that, this presentation at the time of its creation did have a a dated piece of information in here. We've updated the analysis with the addendum. And if I could go to the addendum, the addendum is a one-page replacement of what the prior cost comparison was, further fine-tuned based on information over the course of the weekend as well as yesterday, Monday. So in looking at the financing costs, again, we've looked at this and analyzed it, studied it, had conference calls to go through and exactly drill down to what the financing is. First pieces of information were really kind of hard to decipher, but based on subsequent follow-up information, we understand there's two columns here, two financing approaches. Undertaking one or the other. These are not simultaneously processes that we would take both at the same time. But as I've said before, if the city does do its own publicly offered transaction, the investors who potentially would invest in the PPA would have the ability to invest in the city's COPS, albeit at a reduced rate on a tax-exempt basis. Reduced rate to you, tax-exempt rate to them. So what we're looking at here under the PPA, line 1, guaranteed maximum price, this is the $22.84 million cost that it would take to get the school out of the ground, vertical, complete, and done. There's a couple of add-ons below that to get to a total construction price. But when you look at the difference between the PPA approach with the opportunity zone, and then if we don't have the opportunity zone and we do the COPS, certificates of participation, which is the subject to appropriation debt that the city could issue, the cost of the school goes up $2 million. We're not disagreeing with that. That's the information that was given to us by the developer of the school. And that's sort of the disadvantage of not having the opportunity zone. So when you add all those together, lines 1 through 4, basically the add-ons, the school is going to cost you either $23.5 million under the opportunity zone and PPA, or it's going to cost you $25.5 if you were to just go sign on the dotted line and build the school with a developer, and you get your own financing. So the next question comes along is how does all this filter out when we factor in the cost of the financing and all the other things that we need to do to get to the exact same place that's structured, that's proposed in terms of the cash flows. Going to line 6. So if we look at line 6, the issuance costs of the PPA side total almost $1.2 million. Now, if you look at the city side, certificates of participation or the subject appropriation debt, that estimated cost is about $600,000. So right now, then even though we are increasing the costs on the city side, basically, the issuance costs are kind of at a disadvantage. You're paying upwards of twice the amount almost to do the PPA proposal. Capitalized interest, that is an element of we're funding interest in the loan, because as we understand it, the savings within the school system's budget to pay for this, thus translating back to the city, wouldn't occur until fiscal year 2024. So we've got to bridge that FY23 issue. So we've got to really fund basically a year's worth of interest on the loan. That's 2 payments based on the COPS and the PPA. That's an estimated construction loan there based on the financing provider's numbers. So when we look at the total costs that we are either financing or having to undertake on the PPA side, you can get to the line number 8, $25.3 million. And if we look at the certificates of participation, the city's financing, we're looking at $26.8 million. So we're now at a $1.6 million more or higher number. Part of that is increased construction costs. Part of it is saved due to the savings in cost of issuance. So we're having to say, if we finance those two numbers at 2 different interest rates, which one wins? Which one comes out better for the city's perspective? Also, on top of that, both sides of the equation here, the PPA financing or the city financing, both of them have the benefit of the ARPA funds, known as the ESSER funds, and a little bit of paid-in construction already, paid-in development costs already. So we're going to reduce that for the total cost because that's grant monies as well as costs already paid. So net, getting to line number 10, these are the numbers. It's still the same $1.6 million differential, but we've analyzed what factors into your total payment and what factors into your total cost of funds. Looking at line 10, that's essentially what's funded by both sides, the loan on the PPA or the loan or the debt on the certificates of participation issued by the city. So we're effectively either going to fund $22.6 million under the PPA approach, or we're saying let's ignore the PPA financing and the complicated structure there, take the higher construction costs to the tune of net $1.6 million here, and we're going to finance our own and undertake our own financing to the tune of $24.2 million. So that's essentially the crux of the comparison of the two different approaches that we talked about, either the benefits of the opportunity zone buying down the construction costs, albeit you have more expensive issuance costs, or you have a higher construction cost on the city side, slightly less cost of issuance. So how does that all play into the total debt service? If we then look at the same terms of the loan, 30-year loans effectively, on line number 12, the total debt service that you're paying under the PPA approach is $34.5 million. You might say, okay, well, hey, that's a great number there, but that's the debt service on the loan, not the developer financing piece. So we've got to add that to it. So when you look at the COPS, we've got 35.8. So we're behind on the COPS in the city's transaction to the tune of 1.3 million. So right now, until we get past line 12, it looks like the PPA financing is a better deal. We've got lower construction costs. It looks like we're winning on that side. But when you look at the repayment of what we'll call this equity investment, which effectively is developer financing as well, you have to add another $3.9 million over the life of the transaction. That's $130,000 a year roughly on top of the loan payments. So when you look at that, the city side does not have that at all. So we're still at the total debt service of $35.8 million. And then when you add all of this together, the payments under the PPA approach over the life of the transaction is about $38.5 million. And when you look at the payments under the life of the transaction on the city side is 35.8. Now, what's also on the city side is as we move forward in time, you've got the potential to refinance some of that for interest rate savings as we move forward in time. I'm going to be speaking to you about that tonight later on. That's an aspect of all local municipal debt, generally speaking, is issued with a 10-year ability to refinance after 10 years. But if we look at that and not taking into account refinancing savings, potentially, the city's issuance and the city controlling the financing mechanism based on its own credit rating, credit standing, is a winner by a tune of about 2.6 million plus in that range. And when you see the average annual payments, this is the amount of savings in the school's system that has to come out of the savings to cover this debt service. So if we can reduce that number to the extent we can, you could see that 1.28 million versus 1.194 million, that's $87,000 more that can be allocated somewhere else in the school's budget for operational needs. If you look at the effective cost of funds, the PPA approach is about 445. It's because we've got a 4% taxable piece and we've got the developer financing. And we've got 1.1 million of cost of issuance up front. And if you look at the certificates of participation of the city transaction, it's about a 3% all-in. Now, these are still subject to change. Both are subject to change until they're blocked in. But we have basically at the same apples-to-apples comparison based on market conditions, we've got a 1.45% benefit of cheaper cost of money than we do under the PPA financing. And again, we don't benefit one way or the other in terms of which way the financing goes. Our role to the city and to this as a fiduciary here is to say, okay, which deal, which transaction makes the most sense, which is more cost effective, and which does the city have control over the long run as it finances the school. And from a financing standpoint, as I'll speak to later, we've got a schedule on the next presentation. We're undertaking a proposed refinancing. This could be done simultaneously along the same path to complete both of those within about a 60-day window through mid-March. So, with any questions, I'll be glad to take those.
Mr. Cooch, it may be worth mentioning there are two other potential avenues, which is the Virginia Resource Authority and the potential of the IDA as well.
There are two other approaches. That is to say, we could potentially undertake a financing through VRA, would be subject to appropriation. The benefit of VRA is it further enhances the city's access to lower cost of funding. It would make those numbers look a lot better because VRA is at AAA rates. We're at the strong rates in the A range. The issue with VR is we didn't want to overpromise that. It could take a little longer to implement. Now, that being said, we would strongly, if the desire is to build the school, the city take control of its financing destiny, then we would recommend reaching out to VRA as well simultaneously. Potentially, if there's a route there that could be expedited in context with not jeopardizing the grant funds, by all means, that's a definite route to go as well. Randy, the other approach would be, as we've talked about previously, issuing through the IDA. What we've talked about tonight is something called certificates of participation. This transaction would be directly issued by the city. The school would serve as collateral. It's effectively the same construct as an IDA lease revenue bond, which generally is the way subject appropriation debt is done in the Commonwealth of Virginia. In North Carolina, though, they do certificates of participation. They don't have the IDA conduits. So it's just a different nuance and type of issuance from state to state. Certificates of participation have been done in the past in the Commonwealth. They're not frequent. We think there's a little bit of a better benefit maybe going through the IDA, but it's not significant enough. It is only going to make that comparison look better from that perspective. So those are the other two potential alternatives to the financing structure that we've talked about tonight. And again, that structure, all of those structures would be undertaken by the city, basically controlling its own destiny with respect to the financing costs.
Okay. Mr. Eads or Dr. Perigin, did you have any follow-up there?
A couple things. Mr. Cooch, just when would the payments begin under this model?
Fiscal year 2024.
Oh, no payment until then? Right. Okay, good deal. That I misunderstood that then. And then we also, the financiers from the street team are on Zoom. I don't know if we want to pull them up and see if they want to add anything to the conversation, make sure that we didn't leave anything out, which I very well could have. Can you do that, Jeannie?
This is Rick Gross, Keith.
Hey, Rick, we can hear you, but we can't see you. I bet Jean can get you on the screen here in just a second.
I'm up now.
All right. All right. Rick, what I missed?
So an issue that we raised in our conversations with Davenport and we think is significant for the city has to do with an attorney general opinion that was issued at the city's request a couple of years ago in 2018 about whether PPA financing of this kind would count against the city's constitutional debt limit. And there's two conditions. One is that all the financing has to be subject to appropriation, and that's the same whether you do COPS or the PPA deal. But the other condition we think is only satisfied by the PPA because if there is a lien on the ground, which could be foreclosed in the event of a default for failure to appropriate, the Attorney General says that circumstance would make this financing subject to the 10% constitutional limitation that applies to all Virginia towns. And our information is that the COPS would obtain a lien. It's unlikely it would ever be defaulted, but the Attorney General doesn't talk about the likelihood. He talks about the legal possibility. And if that lien exists on the ground, we think the COPS would count against the limit and that the PPA will not have a lien on the ground and it will not count against the limit. I think that's an important difference as the city thinks about its financial future.
Respectfully, I would say that's not the right conclusion. The Attorney General opinion that has been disseminated amongst the city's bond counsel, McGuire Woods, as well, who's counsel to the PPA, which the city's bond counsel agrees with, and they agree together on that. There are some issues in and of itself with respect to that Attorney General's opinion. I'm not the attorney on this. I'm not the bond counsel. Notwithstanding their problems with that opinion and how this PPA mechanism works, certificates of participation and lease revenue debt issued through the IDA, either or, have been issued successfully in the Commonwealth and do not count. We know that from the city's bond counsel. So I think that if you'd like to debate that with Megan Gilliland, we could take that up in another meeting, but that is bond counsel's word on that.
I would say I'm not interested in any debate. I think the reason I shared the motion as I did is I think that we want what's best for our city. Our kids and our community need a new school. And however we can finance that, whether it's through the COPS or through its PPA, I just want to see it get financed. And that's why I recommend that we try to go find out both options and see what the final numbers are in both, which would all, and then we could work through all those different steps to make sure that it meets that requirement as well. That's my recommendation. I'm certainly not here for a debate, not a debate whatsoever.
We totally are on board with maximizing open up competition. But what we have at hand is a very complicated legal structure through Business Opportunity Zone that's going to require a lot of legal effort to implement. That financing mechanism, once that leaves the train, that's not a simultaneous, let's figure it out and let's see if the interest rate at the end of the day works. We've got a taxable series of rates that we're comparing to tax-exempt series of rates. We've got a cost differential that we know and have quantified. And when we look at those numbers, if we bid them both out at the same time, you're still talking about a taxable rate that a tax-exempt rate is higher, that is lower with. And from our perspective, again, we're looking for the best transaction deal for the city. It's our fiduciary responsibility to recommend the best vehicle that the city has access to undertake the financing. And if it's the desire of the city to undertake this school, and if we know it's at $22.8 million versus $24.8 million, we know there's a better way to skin the cat on the financing.
Okay, my question is on the slide of comparisons, the PPE. We know that that's a fixed rate through AJ Street, correct? Okay. School system's been working on that for several years now. The COP, that funding there, who's going to build that school?
Still J.A. Street.
J.A. Street will still build the school. Okay.
Mr. Raynard, it's essentially, aside from who's building the school, street would still build the school. They give you a cost for it under the PPA approach with all the financing that's built in there. And it'd be great if that higher cost of funds really bought down, that opportunity zone really bought down that cost. But what we know is the differential, we've been told, $2 million, we've got a way to finance the school at a more cost-effective rate. And that's simply the financing mechanism that's put into place.
Well, this is the time where all five of us together up here, the only time that we're allowed to really speak together at a meeting. I just wanted to throw out and just say that I'm encouraged that we're able to at least have the conversation and look at options, that we do have options. It shows kind of where we're at as a city, because a few years ago, there were no options in the past. So I guess my question is to go back to the slide with the wording for a motion. What is it exactly that would be our next step? Because I know we are looking at a lot of numbers, but essentially they can change. And are you saying the only way to really know the exact numbers is to basically look at both options, put it out for bid, and see what the real numbers come back in at?
Mayor Farman, that's a good question. What we're saying with respect to these two, if you've got a GMP opportunity and it's 22.8 or 24.8, we're saying that the bidding process, so to speak, is done under a COPS approach. You go to the public markets, investors are going to be in competition, trying to give you the best rate possible. Doing both of these transactions side by side to see which one comes out at the end doesn't make sense, because you're going to incur financing costs, and we're talking about 1.1 to 1.2 million of financing costs on the street side, but then the other one's going to have some built-in costs as well. Some of those won't be incurred until you actually complete the transaction, but ultimately at the end of the day, with that cost differential between the construction, we've shown mathematically that unless that 4% taxable rate somehow gets magically reduced to 2%, and it comes under the COPS side, it's not going to happen. That one will not win. That taxable rate, again, is not fixed until they sell the debt there either. So both of these are going to move up with the market in tandem. Taxable rates are moving up today. Tax exempt rates are trying to catch up, but they're not moving up as fast. So we've got the benefit there, but ultimately the spread differential, that 1.45% spread differential, is the difference between taxable financing at the PPA approach or tax exempt financing under the city's approach. So our recommendation would be negotiate the best maximum price contract that you can get and do the financing yourself.
Okay, my next question is going to be, how many of these COPs have been done?
In Virginia, there have been about 4 over the years. They're not frequent, but again, they're not so unusual from a market perspective. They're very frequent south of the border in North Carolina. They're done in Maryland. They're done throughout the United States. They're effectively rated based on the city's credit. So we're talking about the same kind of credit quality as a lease revenue bond. If we had our druthers, we'd have the IDA do this. And if the IDA would do it, that would make it a lot simpler. Lease revenue deal, that's done by counties and cities throughout the Commonwealth on a day in and day out basis. So still subject to appropriation. Either way you look at it, it's just the name of the debt.
So there's only been 4 of these ever done in the state of Virginia? Correct?
Yep, that's correct.
How frequently have they been done through the VRA?
School financing through VRA, subject appropriation debt through VRA is routinely done. If borrowers can't provide their GO, local borrowers such as counties routinely provide their subject appropriation debt through VRA. The reason why we're not going through VPSA is because if we were to ask through VPSA, traditionally a debt would be, this would be a no-brainer, would potentially look at VPSA versus the city's GO. The problem with that, or the issue with that, is the legal debt margin. VPSA by state statute is a general obligation, and we just don't have sufficient capacity to do a general obligation debt for this group.
And none of these three options that you presented or the PPEA, from my understanding of the Attorney General opinion, count toward the legal debt margin, correct?
VPSA would count towards legal debt margin because it's general obligation.
Right, but the VRA,
Right.
the
VRA,
IDA.
if it's subject to appropriation, would not count.
Yeah, okay.
IDA as lease revenue would not count. Certificates of participation would not count.
Okay. I have a question for Dr. Perigin also.
Let me clear one thing up here real quick. Mr. Creech, I think it would behoove council to know which one of those options is moral obligation, so that, because that does impact the financial policies that we have here in the city.
All three of those options are moral obligation. Lease revenue, certificates of participation, and VRA. Now, this lease financing, ultimately at the end of the day, the documents are not negotiated on this. The mechanics are not negotiated on this yet. Ultimately, it's the subject of appropriation. So when you look at the component unit, if the city schools is the lessee, and the city is also, I would imagine, is going to be on these documents in some form or another, as a component unit of the City of Bristol, that lease by default is going to get rolled up into as a related party into your financial statements. That is not going to fool any rating agency into saying, oh, this doesn't count, this is not part of your policies, this is not a payment. Effectively, it's another form of debt that's going to count from a credit standpoint and a credit evaluation standpoint. So even though it might be named something different, it might be under an opportunity zone structure, might have all sorts of nuances and mechanics overlaying it, ultimately to get to the same point, it's effectively a debt instrument that the city is responsible for.
Mr. Osborne, I know you have a question, but I just wanted to add one thing. So the IDA, our attorney from McGuire Woods also believes that the IDA is absolutely the best conduit. It can happen the fastest, you can get the best rate, it's done the most. However, we talked to the IDA about this a couple years ago. There wasn't much interest there, and I also petitioned the IDA in August and didn't get positive feedback there either. So to think that you could go through the IDA and do it in a timely manner at this point is, that would really be up to the IDA. But like Mr. Cooch says, even our PPA attorney says that the IDA is the best option. Just throwing that out there.
So my question is related specifically to the motion you suggested. So I took a picture of it so I could think about it for a minute. The way that I'm reading it, it doesn't commit us to any of these to moving forward specifically with any of these. It just says, we're going to do something because we need to build a school, and we know we need to build a school. And this keeps you on your timeline one way or the other to get your ESSER funds, correct?
Right.
That's the reasoning behind the specific timeline of August 23.
Make sure we can leverage the $2 million that's available through ESSER funds.
So play out for me what would happen if we do this motion that you've suggested. What will happen?
Well, so what would happen is if you did this motion, and I don't think that's the one that Mr. Cooch is recommending, but both groups would put those monies out for bid, and by late February, early March, we would have those numbers in. And as you can see, what I recommend in the motion is that as long as it does not have a negative impact on the city, it's in the city's best financial interest, and it does not exceed $1.3 million annually, which is what you approved when you approved the comprehensive agreement in 2019, that Mr. Eads would have the authority, while engaging you along the way and making sure you're aware, to follow that process. However, if the financing plan or plans did not come back and the payment was above $1.3 million, or it was not in the city's best financial interest, that would stop the deal at that point.
What's the latest conversation been with the school board? Do they have any thoughts about the options we've been discussing?
The newest option is very new. So they although I've shared that information with them, they have not. We didn't have that at our last meeting.
Which option is that?
The COPS option. They were aware that we were working on it, but we didn't have the numbers at that time to share with them.
Right.
Let me make sure I understand this. So the price to build the school is $22 million?
Yes.
$22.8 million. Okay, because to me, there's a lot of different things we're talking about here. One, there's $22 million. You need to really get going sometime March-ish, I think is when you've said.
Right. Yes,
or
sir.
there's $2 million of federal money.
Right.
But now, there's $2 million of Opportunity Zone money. So potentially, if you could meld them together, there's $4 million. But I'm saying is, are we rushing to do something to use this $2 million, where now you've identified $2 million that I haven't heard before to the Opportunity Zone?
Right, which was built into the price. It was you didn't hear about it because it was built into the price to build.
So, I mean, that, you know.
Ideally, if you could use the Opportunity Zone inside the COPS, that would be your best bang for your buck, but it's not because of the taxable.
So,
Mr. Hartley, the Opportunity Zone is a benefit to the private sector in terms of the tax benefits and deferrals, whatever works from their economics. That's what an Opportunity Zone is trying to do, and leverage that money to your benefit. So the other $2 million, which is the ESSER funds, are available along this time frame either way under the PPA approach or the certificates of participation. And the Opportunity Zone money that we're talking about, that $2 million coming to the city to effectively help pay for these costs, think of that's effectively a loan. I mean, that's part of the overall loan package. So the Opportunity Zone creates that ability to get that extra loan through that entity. But effectively, when you blend all that cost together, you're talking about with the fixed costs of implementing that transaction, very complicated legal structure, that is about 4.45% in today's market. It's well above market for local government financing.
And I would add to that, if the location, was near the Bristol Mall, which is an Opportunity Zone, or if it's in the VanPelt area, coming down King Mill Pike, that's an Opportunity Zone. But if you were to do this in the center of the city, the Opportunity Zone wouldn't even be part of the equation because of the location.
Well, and, I mean, I guess just, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but regarding the motion, I mean, I'm hearing a lot of conflicting things. I don't know, do I want to see a new school happen? Yes. I mean, as you say, we've talked about it. What I really need is a bottom line number and I know that's where we're getting at, and which number is best, which way to go. But I'm hearing, here's two options. Well, here's some other options out here, like VRA or whatever that we have. Just.
Mr.
I would
Hartley,
say, take everybody, sit down in a room and kind of work this through. And I mean, we don't have to meet. We could have a call meeting just to discuss this. I'm not hearing. I'm hearing so many different things that I don't feel. I mean, I want to see this move forward, but I don't know what the motion's doing.
Yeah.
And it's.
Mr. Hartley, those are good questions, and I expect that type of questioning as well. When we looked at this PPA financing, believe us, it's really hard to decipher. When we looked and drilled down to the costs to have the technically the vehicle, the entity that's bringing you this PPA financing, have built into that financing cost fees that are greater than doing the COPS issue, that struck us as being, how can this be more cost effective for the city in implementing this type of structure? I mean, if the developer said, hey, we can get you that school for $10 million and over here it's $20 million, then we can see that. But we're talking about a $2 million spread in the cost. If we all accept and we know that Street's going to build this for either 22.8 or 24.8, based on the math of access to funds and the cost of capital that the city has direct control over, we would recommend just saying, thanks, let's sign on the dotted line for 24.8. We're going to do our own financing, whether it's COPS, whether it's VRA, or whether it's IDA. Right now, we know the IDA is sort of on the back burner, unless they have a change of mind in the next day and say, we're on board, we're shut off to that approach. If the city would like to, and we would recommend we would engage and discuss with VRA. Is there a way to get this done on our time frame that meets those parameters? If the answer is yes, we would do VRA. But we know right now that a substitute appropriation, which is effectively a certificates of participation issue, is going to be more cost effective than PPA developer sourced financing, which is generally more often the case when we look at, does a developer have access to private investment, private placement investment, not even the public markets, versus the city having access to public markets. 10 years ago, if we were to look at this and say, credit-wise, maybe it's a toss-up. But today, what we're saying is the approach that the city has and can control and have access to is the more cost-effective way. And if we could save you $80,000, $90,000 versus the other approach, that's $80,000 or $90,000 more that can go into the school's budget, not towards a payment on debt. That's simply the approach we would recommend. Again, we've been doing this as financial advisor to local governments. We routinely look at these types of, when they're proposed, these types of privately sourced financings. In fact, up the road, Montgomery County had the exact same structure proposed to them. When they saw the numbers like we did today, they said, thanks but no thanks, we're going to do our own financing. So,
Which way how did they finance it?
They funded it themselves. IDA, they had access to their IDAs. They did that.
They were actually following our PPA model as they were going through that process. That's right. And I'm perfect. I mean, to go say what he said in a different way too, with the $87,000 additional dollars that we would have to apply to the school, that also gets us $87,000 away from that required local effort, because all of these dollars count against your required local effort because they're debt service. And so that's another advantage to that. I want the school to be financed in the best way that it can be for our citizens, and however that happens, I'm good. You know, we've brought a financing plan. If you want to approve that, I'm with you. If you want to approve what Mr. Cooch is recommending, I'm fine with that too. I'm not trying to talk you out of either one of them. And we need a school. We need to do what's best for our city, and we have 2 to 4 really good options right here available for us if you'll just let us put it out there.
I think that I agree with you absolutely that we need a new school. You know, and we've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. So let me just ask. You know, we've heard from the superintendent and from Mr. Cooch. Can I ask the CFO? Do you have an opinion on these different options and what you would think would be most beneficial as the person in the room who knows our city budget? Well, if you don't want to answer, that's okay. That's fine.
Based on the presentation tonight, my thoughts would be that we pursue the lowest overall cost based on what Mr. Cooch is presented. I believe would be first to, I know Dr. Cooch doesn't want to delay anything, nor would I recommend anything that would delay anything. I think it's probably due diligence to ask the IDA one more time if that is what our financial advisor says is the lowest cost.
He's just brought those costs.
I don't feel like there's a hurt to take a day and ask. Then I would probably look at the VRA option if it's within the timeline that is proposed. And then the third cheapest option is the cost. I would look at it from a cost perspective, and I would rank them cheapest.
So my follow-up question to that would be, say if we were to just hold off on doing anything and have, you know, maybe a called meeting on Friday morning or something about this, would that give everyone time to, like, to see if you talk to VRA, would that give time to see if that's something we could stay on our timeline with?
Council, I will tell you, I've had a conversation with bond counsel yesterday, spent a little over an hour on the phone with bond counsel.
I don't think roughly 2 days is going to give bond counsel the appropriate time to do the research that she needs to do in order to give us sound legal advice, which goes hand in hand with sound financial advice. In regards to the motion that was presented here tonight, I have no problem if council directs me to do whatever's necessary to effectuate the transaction. But I would note that motion would, and Mr. Cooch, correct me if I'm wrong, do is basically double the cost when you're going out with the way that motion is presented to the city. So the motion as presented, I think would need to be rewarded. And I'll say it right here because I've told you all privately, I've told you in writing, I've told Dr. Perrichon. What I may consider in the city's best financial interest may not be what the majority of council considers in the best financial interest. But I would do whatever council directed me to do. But I want to remind everybody in this room, I've got a landfill right now that we have no idea what is ultimately going to cost the city. And it's going to cost us millions of dollars, I promise you, to get that landfill corrected. I want to school as much as Dr. Perrichon. I want to school as much as the 5 of you all. But this city is not in a position at this time to make a $24 million decision this week.
Then I would say that turns it into a $26 million decision because you lose the ability to leverage those ESSER funds, plus the increased cost of a construction in the future.
But I guess, so to kind of Mr. Osborne's question, asking about, by the end of the week, and you said that you need bond counsel. How much time would they need? I mean, as far as the IDA, I think that could be done in a day or so. I mean, you could poll the IDA and see if they're willing to meet and discuss this, and I mean, you'd know pretty quick if that's completely off the table, if they have a change of heart. The other options, I think, to get the bond counsel to look at, again, to try to meet the deadline. I mean, the $2 million makes a huge difference. I think that's part of why we're considering this now, is because it brings it and makes it, we don't want to lose that opportunity, but we want to do our due diligence and I mean, and try to figure out what the best route is. And I guess when I'm hearing different people all saying, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, I would rather have everybody get together and work that out than to sit here and I mean, to hear, and each side has its pluses and minuses. And I guess that's the thing too, but because I want this to happen. It's just, what is the best way and mechanism? And I know there's a time frame, but I don't know that. I'd like to think taking, hopefully it's not more than a week to 10 days. And like I say, we could meet sometime next week and be much more informed before we make a decision and determine which path to go down.
I just want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that Mr. Cooch is wrong. I'm just saying here are 2 options. You've got 2 really good options.
Well, the guy on the Zoom said, he was saying, I disagree.
Yeah, right. But I'm saying I'm not.
And I mean, that's what I'm saying. When 2 people are presenting us an option and they can't come to an agreement, and we need to hear from the bond counsel, I would like to have some kind of consensus from those as well as hear from the bond counsel before pushing ahead and making a decision. And if that takes a couple of days, I don't know that that's going to be the end of it. Now, if it took a couple of months, that'd be a different story. But I think...
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying I think they have a great plan.
But I'm just saying, when I'm sitting here listening to this, and plus the thing Mr. Cooch, you just put up on the screen, it wasn't in the packet. I'm going to want to take some time and digest that before moving forward. So that would be, like I say, not to delay it months, but just a few days, a week or so, if that's feasible. That would be, and then we can come back and
Sherry,
move
do you
forward.
want to talk about the potential impact of a 2 or 3 day delay? I mean, we know what it would be if it's a week or 2, but Sorry, I put her on the spot.
On the construction schedule?
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I'm Sherry Brown with J.A. Street. This project is an 18-month construction project, and by our comprehensive agreement, we're supposed to have the school substantially completed by August 1st. It doesn't state the year, but August 1st. And so for us to meet that schedule without any delays in any supplies, weather issues, or anything, I mean, we need to be starting, early in March if possible. So that's another, I have to add something else to your plate. I'm so sorry, but that's just the facts of constructing the building.
Council, I would, obviously, everybody with any financial expertise in this city, and there's two of them, that's Mr. Cooch and Mr. Spradlin, have indicated the IDA is the best route to go for the city. Our bond counsel has indicated she's willing to have a conversation with the IDA and explain, the process to the IDA to see if they would be willing to consider a change of heart. And that is if there's a majority of council that wants to build a school, and I feel like there is a majority of council that wants to build a school. Now, we're not the only client Ms. Gillen has. So whether I could get her in touch with the IDA tomorrow and Thursday, that I couldn't tell you. If we go the VRA route, there's a potential that would have to be a full board approval. Maybe not. And that full board approval would not occur until their March meeting. Is it second week of March? Seems like, I think it's second week of March. So, that's the timeline that we're looking at.
Is there a way to bridge that with additional notice that the city's on board to get the financing?
I don't know. That's something I have to ask bond counsel.
I'll say, access to an equitable education can't take a back seat like it has for city councils for a long time. So whatever it takes to get this school going in March and open in August of next year, I'm in favor of. I'm cool with. I'd like to see more concrete numbers like Councilman Hartley said so that I know exactly what I'm voting on. That would be excellent. And if we can figure this out in 2 weeks and it can keep everybody on schedule, we can figure it out in 3 weeks, I don't care. I don't speak for everyone, but I think everyone up here might agree that we do everything in the most cost-efficient way possible and we get it going as quickly as we can. And that's where I'm at.
All right, I got another couple of questions and comments. Mr. Perigin.
Yes, sir.
We've had two governors, one exiting and one coming in. School's been a top priority in this state. If we move forward with this funding of this new school, what is the potential that we would lose out on millions of dollars that the state is gearing up and preparing to set aside for localities to build and renovate their old school buildings in the future?
So I will tell you.
How much are we risking?
Well,
losing?
You're not really risking any because all the budget, well, first of all, the governor's current budget already sets aside $500 million for school construction. And it's a grant, it's an automatic grant. We don't have to apply for it. Our share of that in the 22-23 school year, if that budget holds, there's a lot of budget work to be done, but if that holds, that would be $1.8 million for Bristol. There is already a budget amendment that's being submitted that would increase that amount to $750 million. By my estimate, that would get us to $2.7 million. And so its potential, just that, if we start building the school now, we could take another $2.7 million if all that stuff goes well and apply that to the down payment, which would get that payment down even further. Delegate O'Quinn is submitting legislation that would require the state to do that on an annual basis, not at that same amount, but to provide school construction grants on an annual basis, not just a one-time like this one is. And so that you don't risk anything by not doing that. The rest of the legislation is around how much of the teacher retirement fund goes into the literary fund and how the rates on the literary fund are, and the max on the literary. We're not eligible to use the literary fund. because of our debt capacity. So those are the bills that are being, that are out there right now.
Okay, now, correct me if I'm wrong on these numbers. To build this school is $23 million roughly.
Sure.
You've got 2 million that you can?
2.44.
2.4, okay, 2.4. Okay, I think everybody on council, and I'm not going to speak for them, but we all know that we need to start updating our schools, okay? And we have talked about this countless hours. My number one concern was not to go above our legal debt limit, okay? Time has been our friend in this city with the policies and the procedures and practices we set forth several years ago. We're now sitting here with $19 million worth of borrowing power and still be under our debt, legal debt. But we've got a beast sitting across town that we don't know how much money we're going to be spending to straighten it out, and we're going to forever be feeding it. So everything we do has to be done with caution. I would like to have another meeting here in the very short future to brainstorm the best avenue to finance this. I'm going to propose, because we've got $19 million worth of borrowing power to still stay under our debt capacity. We have $19 million in the bank that we've never had for decades and decades. I'm going to recommend that we brainstorm and see if this city can agree to take $5 million out of our reserve accounts, along with $2 million that they are going to, 2.4, that they're going to be able to contribute, finance this through the IDA, keep it in the city in our bonds to where we can restructure them at any time. Instead of having payments of $1.2 million, under this scenario, we would have annual payments of right at $800,000 for 30 years, which is a total savings over the life of this proposed loan tonight of almost $10 million. We can do this, and at the end of 30 years, we will only have $24 million invested of taxpayers' money in that school. We need to be smart about it. We need to crunch all the numbers. We need to make this happen with the least financial impact on our citizens. And the $5 million out of our reserves, the $2 million that they're contributing with a 30-year lease or 30-year on the bonds is the best case scenario. Now, this is what I do, is crunch numbers and figure out how a poor person is going to be able to do something and still put food on the table. And this is the best case scenario. And we need to have another talk about it. This is a huge commitment for this city. It's huge. Because we've got so much looking at us that we don't know what's going to happen with this landfill. This landfill could sink this city. But so could a lot of other things.
I agree with you.
So we can't be hung up on not moving this city forward because of the landfill. Now, we got to fix that landfill. It don't matter. We got to fix it. It stinks, and we're affecting 2 states here. It has got to be fixed. But we do have the opportunity to do this and move forward with pulling out of the city funds, pulling out of the school funds, and keeping this in the city financed to where we have control over all the bonds going forward to rework them and redo them. That's where I'm at on this.
Kind of the point that got brought up, Dr. Perigin, you mentioned all these state bills. At some point, would you send us the bill numbers so we can track them and keep? But, that there's a potential of state funding, you mentioned using the reserves. In each of these scenarios, are you able to put more money towards this before the school opens? I mean, in either scenario?
Well, Mr. Hartley, the financing that we're putting in place, if we know the cost is $23 million or $25 million, if it's without the opportunity zone, whatever the number is, making that determination before we do the financing is the best approach. So if we're talking about, as Mr. Wingard had a great idea there, in terms of what are we going to contribute, if we're going to contribute any more money towards the down payment on this, we do that analysis up front and we know what we're going to do and know what we're going to finance on the back end. That's the prudent way of doing it. You know what you're getting into and you know what your payments are. What you're suggesting is if we wait until the end of the process and say, okay, how much do we want to contribute, the debt's already issued, whether it's the PPA or PPA has no ability to prepay with economic advantages. But the other side is if you do city issues, you've got a 10-year window where you can't prepay anything. So we would recommend analyzing all the sources up front, and if you want to make a down payment, whatever that number is, that would be the number we'd say combined with lease revenue debt in this case to do the financing.
Well, I'm just thinking, for example, using the state, I mean, if you're, and I don't disagree with your number, but right now that's contingent on so many things that, we wouldn't really know what that number is or have access to it until after we've approved a financing plan. That was what my question is. If something like that comes along, can we use that? Is it going to help? Is it just going to be prepaying some of this down, or can we reduce the principal along the way?
Yes, you could prepay, or you could effectively fund 1 year's worth of debt service on it, or however you want to do it. But if you've locked in the financing under either approach, the PPA has difficulties in making any prepayments that's cost effective. The lease revenue, the COPS, whatever you want to call them, city-controlled financing mechanism, you've got the ability to prepay at the call date on that. So it's a little more difficult, but you've got the ability to prepay that one. The other side, you've got you basically have to make the investor whole to prepay.
Well, like I said, because I can see scenarios where funds may be available that and I'll use that as that we don't know or won't know an exact amount. So going in on the front end, it would be a little more difficult to do that. I was just wondering how if one offered more flexibility, because that might be a consideration.
There wouldn't be the flexibility in the plan that the street team has put together. I'll tell you that the governor's current budget, if that sticks and throughout the budget process, it does have the carryover language, so you don't have to spend it in the fiscal year in which you receive it, which is not typical for school funds, but it does have that carryover language with it.
Okay.
Dr. Perigin, I'll just add to the comments made already, having some of the questions already answered, but, and also just to say, you do have, I know everyone else has said you have their support, and you and I have had a lot of conversation about this, and I certainly want to see this new school built. So we just got to figure out the best way we can get that done, and as soon as possible. So hopefully we can work with IDA, bond council, and figure out when we can get these other meetings scheduled as soon as possible.
And the last thing I'll say is, yes, I do want to see a new school built, and I think it's in the best interest for our kids and our teachers here in the city. And I've heard the term a lot, the best interest of the city. One thing I think we need to keep at the top of our priority list up here is the items such as our credit rating, credit agencies, our debt capacity, legal obligation versus moral obligation, because we have made a lot of progress over the past few years, and we need to make totally sure on where we are with some of those items and how it'll affect us in the future.
Well, and I would just say, I was going to say to Mr. Wingard's comments earlier, talk about the albatross that the dump is. I think my job as school superintendent for the City of Bristol, Virginia, is to make sure that our aging, crumbling, decrepit schools aren't the legacy that you leave that becomes the beast later on down the road. I mean, it is past time to replace those schools, and that's my role. And again, I understand the whole city concept too, and I want what's best for the city as a whole.
Well, is everybody are we going to meet again to go over this and see what kind of financing route we're going to take?
And in the meantime, will there also be a discussion with members of the IDA?
Well, here's my suggestion. You can take it or leave it. I think it would be wise for the 5 of you all to have individual meetings with one another to discuss Mr. Wingard's idea tonight that I think Mr. Cooch suggested is a good idea, and determine if that's something, because we can sit in here, guys, for 6 hours and talk about how to finance this school. And I guarantee you 6 hours from the time we start, we'll know about as much then as we do right now. So I would suggest that the 5 of you all have some serious conversations over the next day or two. Let me get in contact with bond counsel to see when she can meet with the IDA, and then we can really start discussing with the IDA. From my perspective, and from Ms. Spradlin's perspective, and from Mr. Cooch's perspective, financing this through the IDA is our best option for the city. And if that's what makes the most sense, then you've got my commitment that I'm going to do everything I can to show the IDA that this is the best financial interest of the city, and hopefully get a majority of IDA members to agree with that. If not, then we go to step 2, which is the VRA route. But I think the key right now for the 5 of you all is to have discussions amongst yourself, no more than 2 of you at a time, to figure out what is the best way to move forward. Bring that back to Ms. Spradlin and I, and let us make sure that it's a viable solution.
Okay, because what I've come up with, and I've sat here and I've listened to everybody and I've done the math. It's chicken scratch, but it's important. The school's $23 million. If we contribute 5, they contribute 2.4. That takes us down to borrowing 15.6. If you take $15.6 million at 3% interest for 30 years, your payments is $789,324 a month, which equals, $65,770 a month, which equals $789,324 instead of $1.2 million. That's huge. And at the end, listen to this, at the end of 30 years, we have spent in financing charges and everything else $23.6 million. We need to pay this money up front. We need to pay it up front.
As y'all schedule your one-by-ones or whatever you call them, I would be happy to meet along, not to provide any suggestions, but just to answer any questions that you have. And I will provide one suggestion, though. Mr. Eads may throw his water bottle at me. You're talking about the money that you have in your bank account, but you also have ARPA funds available that can be used for this purpose as well. And so that might be part of your conversation as you're talking about ways to make down payments on it.
So in both of these scenarios, and I know you were wanting to move forward and get to the timeline, and appreciate Ms. Brown reminding us of what that timeline is. I mean, so, if will either what you've suggested, taking a few days a week, I mean, will that still, will we, depending on how we come out of that, be able to move forward and keep the timeline? Does it sound like?
Rather than the alternative, we'll make it work. I mean, if a few days, we'll make a few days work. We don't have weeks. We don't have weeks, but we do have days.
Well, and because I think, it's a good discussion, but as Mr. East pointed out, we probably need to talk it through, or we'll be here till midnight.
Yes,
we may be anyway.
I still have one more presentation.
I know. That's why I say we may be. But I think we all want to see this happen. We want to see it done in a financially responsible way, but we want to see this happen and know that the timing's kind of coming together. That if we're going to do, and I think I said this the last couple of times we voted on this, if we don't use this model or use something like it, it could take 7 to 10 years, and we can't wait that long.
We don't have that.
Okay. Well, if that's the end of this item, we will move on to the next item now. If everyone's okay, we'll press forward. The next item is discussion of energy performance contract for Virginia High School, Virginia Middle School, and VanPelt Elementary School. Nobody signed up for public comment for this item. Staff report.
Mr. Eads, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, our board last week approved to go into an energy performance contract with Energy Systems Group. Cheryl Midkiff and her team are actually on a Zoom call too. If you have any questions about the technical issues, they'll be there to answer them for you. I'll do my very best to explain this to you as we go along. It looks like we're on track to building a new elementary school and closing our 3 oldest. 1938 building, a 1948 building, and a 1968 building, who have huge, you have a copy of our capital improvement plan and all the items that are still on there. Well, we still have to take care of the other 3 schools that we have, and the energy performance contract, leveraged with our available ESSER funds, is going to really put our city into a situation where our school facilities are ahead of the curve. And so let me tell you, we have already approved a portion of this. It is basically budget neutral because of the savings that are generated through the contract, and those savings are guaranteed. But there are some items that did not generate savings that need to be taken care of as well, which would take an additional appropriation from the city. And that's why I'm here to share that with you tonight. So Gene, if you'll pull up that, thank you, sir, on cue. This is just a slide that they had. We met with the ESG team multiple times. That's the same group that put in the bipolar ionization units when we first opened school during COVID. And they understand what it is that we're trying to do, and that was the purpose for that slide. So as you go through, if you look at, this is the audit report that they did, and you'll see that in scenario 3, which is the scenario that our board has already approved, we are going to do lighting upgrades. We're going to do water conservation issues by installing better commodes, toilets, and sinks, and a system to mix our cleaning supplies on site. We will not, in that scenario 3, replace the distribution pump or the variable frequency drives, but we will have new HVAC controls installed at the existing VanPelt school. This is the 1974 version of the VanPelt school. Then you look at Virginia Middle School, and there's some more upgrades there as well, again with the lighting and water conservation, heating plant upgrades, so we would be upgrading the boiler. And we would, again, have to pass on the distribution pump and the variable frequency drives and the HVAC system upgrade. But we would have a new chiller and a new boiler installed there and new HVAC controls as well. At the high school, it's even there's even more activity going on through this plan. And we will be able to do all the things that we had planned to do through the energy performance contract at Virginia High School. But you have a copy of that, so I won't read all those items for you. And so if you look at it, in scenario 3, which is the one that we approved, we will generate savings of $113,000. annually. And a majority of those savings are guaranteed. If we don't meet those savings standards, the ESG writes us a check for whatever that difference is. 40% of the savings will be because of the water that we conserve, of water and sewer bills, 30% for lighting, 15% for the HVAC, and then 15% for other measures that are going on behind the scenes as well. And so if you look at it from a cash flow, if you look at the two different options, the one project is $5.6 million and the other project is $4 million. Our board has approved the $4 million project. As you can see, both projects only generate just a little over $2 million in savings over the course of what ends up being a loan. And so for us to do the remaining projects, we would have to have an additional appropriation from City Council. And so here's the reason why we think we should do that. What we would be doing additionally would be installing the pump and variable frequency drives, and we would also place unit ventilators inside of the classrooms at Virginia Middle School. All of this equipment is getting very close to reaching its end of life expectancy, and there will be additional future operational and maintenance savings, but not that come off of it's operational savings and maintenance savings, not money savings based on these. You'll have the efficiency and safety of the new equipment, and while we're already doing construction at these sites, it's an opportune time just to add these to the list as well. As I said earlier, there are $1.6 million in projects in Scenario 2 that can be paid for either through this process or with cash later. With the new school, our CIP, as I mentioned earlier, is greatly reduced. We have already used a tremendous amount of our CARES and ESSER funding to do building upgrades, especially with our heating and cooling units. And you combine that with the energy performance contract, and this City Council and our school board will leave whoever follows you guys 10 years down the road in a much better position from a capital standpoint than the position that you inherited. The energy performance contracts do not count towards debt capacity because it's an encouragement the state puts out for folks to conserve energy, and also they're not treated as debt service in your required local effort calculation. So this is, we don't have to have City Council's approval to go through this process. Obviously, we've kept you up to date all along that we were going to do it. And so, again, this is just the most recent update for that. So these are the pumps that I mentioned earlier. As you can see, they have served us well over time, but they are getting very close to their end of life. If these pumps go out, we lose our ability to heat our building. And so if we don't make this part of this project now, it'll have to be done in the future and could potentially put us in a situation where if it happens at the wrong time, we've got cold school buildings. And that's not a scare tactic, that's just where we are. And these are the current unit ventilators. As you can see, those have been at Virginia Middle School for a good spell. You can see with the case, and whenever you take the case off, there's a huge difference in those. But these are going to have to be replaced in the near future too. Mr. Buckles, who could not be with us tonight, he's home sick, but thought that at best that we were looking at a 5-year lifespan at best if all things went well on those units, 3 to 5 years. So the next steps, we have already approved our scenario. We're going to secure the financing, we're going to sign the contract, and construction will get underway later this spring on the project that's already been approved. However, if City Council decides that they would like to knock these other items off the list, just like we said earlier, now's the time to put it on the front end. You're looking at about $135,000 difference, so we would have to have an additional annual appropriation for that, and that is a 20-year loan. So we would be asking for an increased appropriation. Now, if that's not the direction that City Council wants to go, just know that sometime in the next 1 to 3 to 5 years that we may be coming back to you asking for the money to replace those products. And so if you look at the total principal amount, the annual payment is $272. The generated savings is $169,000, and the savings will be $206,000 annually. This was the plan that we just did. You'll remember the windows that are installed at Virginia High School. We used this same model to do that. We actually generated all the savings that they guaranteed by the end of the contract before we ever got to the end of the contract. So we actually even saved an additional $100,000 because we didn't have to continue having that service. And so these energy savings contracts work. There's evidence they work, and if they don't work, the company then writes you a check for the savings that you don't generate. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And we have Cheryl on the line, if Jean would pull her up, and Cheryl and her team from ESG to answer additional questions as well.
And is it possible to go back a few slides when you were looking at scenario 2 and 3?
Yes. Jean will probably have to pull the zoom off.
Go one more. That one. So just to be clear, you all have approved scenario 3, which is roughly $4 million total project cost, where you're writing a check essentially for about $2 million.
We're using our ESSER funds in either, yes, in either scenario, we're using our ESSER funds to bring that payment down. That is not the same $2 million we're talking about with the new school.
So essentially no additional appropriation or anything for scenario 3.
Right. It's not exactly budget neutral, but we can take care of that in our own budget without asking for any money to make that happen.
Okay. So that's full steam ahead, no approval from us. You guys are good to go there if that's the way we go. Scenario 2, the more expensive one, is the one where we essentially don't have any more savings, essentially, per year, but it's where we're able to knock off some things off the capital improvement plan list faster. Okay. And that would require about $1.6 million from us.
Roughly.
Which
not from you. It would be rolled up into the loan, and we would need a $135,000 increase to our appropriation annually.
$135 a year. Okay. And that's if it's paid for over time. Essentially, I'm not saying that we do this, but if there was some of our ARPA money could essentially pay for
you can
some of
reduce that payment. But again, like we mentioned in the last agenda item, it has to be done at the front end. And there is a charge for change orders as you go along too. So.
Would any of the school construction, would that fall, what you might get from the state, would that fall under this?
Yeah, the current budget that Governor Northam put out, again, there's a lot to be done before the budgets are finalized. But yes, you could use that money to offset the cost of this project.
And so when would you, I mean, you know, ideally it would be great if you could wait until we went through the budget process so we could kind of see where we stand on some things before, you know, knowing that we'd have to increase your appropriation, not just in this year, but you know, ongoing. Right. But I mean, when will y'all have to make the decision on this? Because, you know, from what you're saying, you know, I get it, and I listened to the school board meeting the other night and heard this discussed at much length. And it seems, you know, eventually this is going to have to be done. It's probably more convenient, a little more effective to do it now. And it also gets, you know, if we move forward with the new school and this, it gets all of our buildings up to a much better place.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying this is not one of those, I'm just going to keep coming up. I think this is an opportunity for the city to make a decision, pay me now or pay me later. I mean, it's obvious, you can look at those pictures and see that those items are going to have to be replaced. Do you want to do it and pay for it $135,000 at a time? Or do you want to pay for it whenever it happens and it needs to be replaced and pay for it with cash at that time? That's not my decision. We have an opportunity to do it either way right now, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention and see which direction that y'all would choose us to go. You don't have to make a decision on this tonight, obviously, or even the next couple of weeks. You could wait till after the budget. However, the cost will go up because you'll have change order cost and the potential cost of, not necessarily of construction, but the cost of the product could potentially go up if you add this on later.
Well, and I guess that's the thing. I mean, I know this isn't like we have to make a decision, but there is a window where you can do it, and it's relatively easier to do it. And then once you get out of that window, it becomes much harder. And at some
You may bring
point,
the
you
team
just
on
can't.
from ESG. They'll better answer that question, unless y'all want to see another slide. I've seen plenty. Gene's pulling them up there. Cheryl, while they're queuing you up, I don't know if that'll be you or David that'll answer that question, but I assume that you heard the question. What is the ideal window to make a decision about scenario 2?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Perigin. It would be ideal to make it sooner than later, just because of the ESSER funds that would be associated with this. We're looking at a 12-month construction. We talked about, including those funds throughout the drawdown process, but also you have a materials cost issue. As you mentioned, we're bidding things out now. Contractors are only honoring those bids for a certain period of time, which is a very small window, like 30 days, 60 days max. And those costs could potentially go up, significantly if we're not careful. So that's one of the biggest issues.
What about the cost of change orders as you move forward? Is that significant?
Yes, it could be. And then also you've got disruption again after we come in with contractors and so forth, and then we have to come back in. Change orders are allowed throughout the Commonwealth, but there is a limit associated with those. So we'd have to be careful in terms of what those limits might be. These may exceed those amounts that we could do through a change order.
Cheryl or David, anything I left out in the presentation?
I believe you had everything covered well.
Well, I'll just say it's exciting to talk about the options. Anytime we're upgrading existing buildings and we're able to get creative and we don't have to, for instance, write a check up front for all of it is encouraging. So just to clarify, so you don't really necessarily need a motion or a vote or decision for us tonight. We can talk about pros and cons of scenario 2.
What I would suggest is maybe even while you're talking in your one-on-ones, if this is something that you want to add to this project now, maybe consider making it an agenda item at your next meeting in January. Or if not, you can wait till after the budget and add it on after you've gone through the budget process. That's completely your decision. We're moving forward with our scenario and just didn't want to leave y'all out in the cold on the other options that were available. Y'all fuss at me later on because we had the opportunity.
All right, well, if there's any other questions or comments from the council, if none, Dr. Perigin, thank you for that.
Thank y'all. Thank you very much.
The next item on our agenda, item 8, consider potential refunding opportunity for 2018 taxable general obligation bonds. There was one person that signed up for public comment for this item, and that was Michael Pollard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. As usual, it's awkward making any comments before we've seen the presentation, but based on the materials that were provided in the agenda packet, it appears that this calls for an increase in the bonds of $10.25 million. And that brings up the question as to why that's there. And I think of two obvious options. Of course, we're probably going to find out the answer to my question shortly. Whether that's going to refund other bonds that are not reflected in the document, or if it's going to increase the debt by $10 million simply because it's a good rate. And I would tend to expect that it's going to refund other bonds that aren't reflected, but the document didn't say that. And that's a rather important question for us to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. Nobody else signed up for public comment, so we'll move on to staff report.
Mr. Cooch from Davenport will present.
Okay, as I alluded to in the conversation with the schools, this is the refinancing opportunity that we have talked about with respect to the City of Bristol potentially thinking about undertaking here. Again, and I'll explain the difference between the debt refunded and the debt issued. It does have to do with the way debt is paid off and how you pay that off, and ultimately exchanging high interest rate debt for low interest rate debt, and how that savings works. Just a little bit of background. We're here, we're your financial advisor, I've been here for 20 plus years. I'm not going to belabor the point, but here's some points that we've talked about. Key to this is we routinely look at your debt for interest rate savings. Budgetary savings, cash flow dollars, year in and year out that hit the bottom line, allow you to devote money towards other things such as essential equipment, essential staffing, essential police, et cetera, and that sort. So any dollar that you can avoid paying on debt service is a dollar that can go towards other things. So what we want to talk about in this next section here, a few pages, is the potential refinancing opportunity with respect to the Series 2018 general obligation taxable bonds. These bonds were issued under the legal debt margin of the city. We'll talk a little bit about the impact, the immediate impact, but how that over time builds back up very quickly. And we also have a timetable for implementation. As we're saying here, this timetable is relatively quick. It can also then incorporate a school financing along the same path. So simultaneously, these two can work at the same time. They're both controlled by the city, both implemented by the city. So talking about the Series 2018 bonds. Just to give you a little bit of background, last year in 2020, not last 2021, 2020, we helped the city undertake a refinancing in calendar year 2020 of taxable general obligation bonds. It was the Series 2014 bonds, as well as some other bonds that were issued back then, 2010. Refinancing those two, the city effectively saved about $3.5 million over the life of that debt. We helped the city bring down that debt service in a meaningful way, which helped the city's budget in a meaningful way every year. Based on market conditions today, and we'll talk about that, is that we have about $68.5 million of general obligation debt that's already outstanding, so 2018 bonds. We can call those bonds, as I've said, the ability to prepay in advance of their maturity at a specific date. Those bonds that we're talking about refinancing, 4.1%. The effective cost of those bonds is 4.1%. In order to refinance that, the reason why there's a difference here is we've got to fund an escrow to the payoff date. We can't just turn around and pay those off tomorrow once we issue the new bonds. It's not like a standard mortgage loan in that respect. These are publicly offered bonds that have a prepayment date that's set in to the bond documents at that point in time. So what we have to do is we have to fund an escrow to pay the interest and the principal at that payoff date. So that debt, to refinance that, we're going to issue $78.7 million of bonds. The delta is the $10 million difference. That's precious legal debt margin that we've talked about. But what we'll see on the next several pages is how that helps the city's cash flow. And also, the legal debt margin changes over time. Within a few years, like essentially 18 months, we're in fiscal year 2022 is almost done here in the spring, 2023, 2024, we're going to be essentially almost back to the same legal debt margin within about 2 years that we have today. So when you look at the refunding debt that's issued, we're talking about an all-in cost of 2.46%. That difference is the reduction in interest rate combined with a change in bond size that results in essentially about $3.6 million worth of cash flow savings, about 4.2% when you present value all that back into today's dollars on the debt that we're refinancing. So what does that look like in terms of cash flow? I'll get to that in a minute, but this gives you an interest rate indications of what's been happening in the taxable markets since basically most recently in the current past couple of years. But if we were to look back in 2018, my eyes are not that good, so I'm going to try to look at my page here. 2018, if you look back a few notches there, you're almost on the upper side of that little mini bump up in rates, and you can see we've really come down into what we'll call very good and very low interest rates on a taxable basis. These bonds were taxably issued. We've got to refinance them on a taxable basis right now as well. You can see that in 2020, when the city did undertake its last refinancing, the 14 bonds, we really caught that market in really an ideal place. So the city really did take advantage at that time and really was able to refinance debt for interest rate savings in a beneficial manner. So looking at the specifics of this transaction, again, talking about refunding about $68.5 million, about 4.1% overall costs. We're refunding maturities. This is the bond issue has maturities all the way throughout final maturity. We're talking about refunding debt that's scheduled to be paid in 2027 through 2042. We're going to replace it with debt all along that curve up until 2042. We're not extending the debt at all. The refinancing is repaid over the same time frame, and we're actually going to, because of the way the refinancing works, even though we're issuing more debt, we're replacing that debt, we're replacing the higher interest with a little more debt, reduced interest, so we're actually paying off that debt in the new issue a little bit faster than the 2018 bonds. And that's why the legal debt margin really kind of corrects itself and gets back into place within a couple of years. If we look at the total cash flow savings, we're talking about, again, almost $3.6 million. What that means to the city's budget is it's about $180,000 a year throughout the life of this loan. Now, if we wanted to, we can move that savings around a little bit, so we can maybe front load a little savings if we have some immediate needs, or we can make the savings level over the life of the issue. This is the standard approach of taking those savings over the life of the issue. So that would effectively reduce the payments that the city has to make on its debt service every year by the tune of about $180,000. Again, this is current market. We've evaluated it. From our perspective, it's about on par today in that range as well. So legal debt margin, what we're talking about today, we've got about $19 million, as Mr. Wingard said, as of FY 2021. When we look at FY 2022, we've got that immediate sort of, we're going backwards a little bit here to about $12 million. But if you look at what is also not taken into account here is that assessed valuation assumes it's not growing at all. We do know that the assessed value is going to grow this next year. That's going to help you out a little bit. But also, if you were to scroll down, and we think that growth based on this new assessed value is about 2 to 2.5 million. So we're going to add that back. And if you look at by the end of FY 2023, we're at 16 million based on a flat growth in assessed value. If you add that 2.5 million back to it based on the growth we know we're going to hit, then we're back essentially at the $19 million level within about 18 to 24 months. So effectively about the same place in terms of legal debt margin. We've just reduced our cost on our debt that we've got, as we've done before, as we've done in 2020. We've reduced the cost on the debt and then helped the city's budget out in perpetuity as long as this debt's outstanding. Now, because this debt is issued in the public markets, you've got the ability to refinance this debt again in about 10 years or a little bit shorter than that, as interest rates, if they continue to come down as we move forward in time, we'd be essentially replacing longer debt with shorter debt. So there's an opportunity to look at potential recent financing savings in the future. That's an attribute of debt that you issue in the public markets, whether it's general obligation or lease revenue as well. From a timetable, next steps, what we would see here or anticipate is that we're presenting tonight. If the savings potential and the markets hold in is to your liking, we would undertake the pathway of really getting this done in earnest. This pathway of potentially obtaining and securing this savings also is a simultaneous path as you make the decisions and think about considering the school, which we can undertake a lease revenue financing if the IDA is on board, or certificates of participation, or if VRA allows us to go down that path as well. So this is the exact same time frame that we would anticipate. So with that, I would be glad to take any questions on this refinancing opportunity.
So am I correct that we would have about $180,000 in additional cash flow over the next 10 years on average?
You would have, going back,
I know it fluctuates, but is that about?
whoops, I'm sorry here. Let me go back to that page. You'd have 180,000 of cash flow through 2042.
Yeah. But in the interim, that this would increase. This would take us $4 million closer to our legal debt limit.
It would, your legal debt limit, instead of being 19 million in FY21, would be about 12 million at the end of FY 2022. So it's a little bit of a bump there,
yeah,
up, but by FY 23, you're back to 16 and 19 million again.
So, one, I appreciate you, as always, coming and bringing this before us. I know over the years you have done a good job of finding opportunities that have helped us out to look at these refinancing opportunities and swap debt for at a higher interest for lower interest. So I always appreciate that, and it has made a difference in the time I've been on council doing that. You know, unlike the other times, though, you know, I mean, in every scenario, you've always not extended the length of the loan, or at least the last few times we've tried to keep it the same, just getting a better rate. This one, you know, appears to have a little more bump on our legal debt limit, and part of that's the escrow. So a couple of questions would be, one, when you go, and you mentioned the slide about going to the markets and stuff with different things, how big a factor is that for the rating agencies when they look at our debt margin and you know, because we've done a really good job over the last few years of bringing that down, and that, and I think a lot of other things have helped give us a better credit rating. So how big a factor is that?
Mr. Hartley, that's a good question as well. We would think about that from that perspective. I think the rating agencies don't view that as a big a component, and I'll tell you why. There are four things that go into the rating criteria. First and foremost, you have management. Management is a very significant factor in when we talk about management, we're talking about council direction, council guidance, staff leadership. That's a big piece. It's about 30% of the rating. Economy is about 40% of the rating. Then we have finances. That's about 20%. And when I say finances, that's reserves. You've done a very good job of boosting your reserves up, keeping within policy, and maintaining that level of reserves and flexibility within the budget. Having the ability to work within your budget, manage your means, refinancing debt when the opportunity is there to help you, give you more budgetary flexibility, that's a critical component as well. From the perspective of legal debt margin, we're talking about that's a small piece within debt management, overall debt management. So that's debt and pensions is about 10% of the criteria. So we're really talking about, from perspective of impact on the credit rating, we're seeing that this effectively, little blip for a couple of years on the legal debt margin, not a big impact on the overall credit withstanding of the city. What they're going to see is improving finances, fund balances that have increased, good use of money and stewardship of the city's finances. That's a track record. Those are the pieces, and stewardship is taking advantage of opportunities to reduce your overall fixed costs, such as debt service. So, long-winded answer of saying the legal debt margin implication here is really a non-impact.
Okay, my next question, Ms. Cooch, is, I know part of this, what makes it bump up is the escrow, because we're prepaying things before time. So,
Right.
we're having to set that aside because I guess it's 10 years or whatever, probably before they were callable. And so if over time, that would go down.
Correct.
But then we run the risk
Of rates
not,
going up.
not,
Yeah.
not a risk. I mean, I think it's pretty
Market's
clear
changing.
that the telegraphing that the interest rates are going to go up. So
Right.
so, I mean,
There is
there some, what I'm saying? Speculate that if you waited a little bit, yes, the interest might go up. You might not get as much interest savings, but your escrow amount would also
Right.
not be as big. And it seems to me that there might be, I don't know if this could be the point, or it might be another point where it's not that much of a difference.
These bonds, I believe, were issued in 2018 with a 2026 call date. So we are now in 2022. So we've got basically a 4-year escrow that we can pay them all off. So we're funding, excuse me, we're issuing bonds to fund that payoff to 2026, and we're not able to earn the 4% that those bonds are bearing interest at. Now, your question is good. So if we waited to 2026, we wouldn't have to fund this escrow. But if we could pay those off immediately and rates were 4.1%, then there's no savings.
Yeah.
We've missed the opportunity there. As we move forward in time, that we're going to get the benefit of that rate being able to go up a little bit, but the closer we get to the call date and the closer we get to 4.1%, this opportunity basically just goes away and left rate to rates come down again.
And then I guess a question for Ms. Bradlin. I know, during all your quarterly things you present, our debt plan, and you have for quite a while now, and I'm very impressed that it shows it going out, I think, until 2026 or 2027. How would this, I would assume this would help kind of bridge that gap? Because I know somewhere about 27, I think now, it kind of hits the peak. And so how would this impact that?
It would actually help the debt plan if council chose not to use those annual savings to offset other annual expenditures that, such as salary or personnel type things. But if you incorporated all this into the debt savings and you kept the debt budgeted, it would really help. It would.
Because, like I say, I know there was, it seems like we can get so far, a lot farther than when we first started, or I think, but there's still at a point, there's a gap, and that's where I was wondering how much, because again, that's not as big a concern, I don't think, as it was when I first got on council. It was a huge concern, and now it's managed, to your point about managed staff and
it would
managing
reduce
it, but there still is a gap out
Yes.
there at some point.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll say this is a tremendous amount of information. I think that probably in the best interest of, us making a good, sound decision, I think we probably need to table this and determine which is more important, whether it be a cash flow thing or something that hits our debt limit, the way it would. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump in here and make a motion that we table this and postpone it to a meeting to be determined, so we can have some more time to understand these numbers and digest them. That's my motion.
Were you asking for us to approve it? I mean,
I-
my
we were-
understanding was this was just a presentation
we were-
that we would have, you know, I mean, he showed the timeline. It would be at the earliest the next meeting, but I don't know
think-
that we have to take any action
Well,
tonight.
I think really what precipitated maybe potentially any action was the school that was going to require
Right.
school. If you all would have taken action on the school tonight to move forward, then we would have probably needed to have taken action on this as well.
Right.
Based on that, based on what has just transpired over the past 45 minutes, I don't feel like 2 weeks makes a difference. Do you?
No, I don't think so either. And I think the direction was, it was not so much as an action, but a direction to proceed forward and come back to you with official action, which wouldn't have to be taken until February anyway. So if it's council's direction to think about it for the next 2 weeks in context of the school issue, then it's not gonna make a big difference.
Is that, I mean,
That's fine with me.
you know, I guess if we had taken action, I would
Yeah, I mean, it's
definitely
fine.
be with you to put it, give us some more time to think about it, but I didn't necessarily take what you were coming here tonight as saying we have to take action immediately. This is more kind of like Dr. Perigin with the energy savings, saying this is something for you to consider. There's a window you have to take action, but it's not immediate that you have to make a decision tonight.
It's generally would have been, if council was liking of this idea, an indication that they wanted to proceed with it, then we could begin in earnest. And otherwise, if based on what I'm hearing, and council wants to take more time to think about it, then we wouldn't really proceed in earnest until we got that final decision. Because it is a process, and interestingly enough, it's the same process that we would undertake the IDA financing on as well.
Okay. So essentially, we could withdraw the motion and take no action, essentially.
Or we could
Well,
pass your
I think-
motion. I mean, either way,
Either way, I think Mr. Osborne's motion is correct, and we just postpone it to
I can amend my motion.
whatever 2 weeks from today is.
I can amend my motion that we take this up on the second meeting in January.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll second that then. Like I say, I just wasn't sure that we even needed to postpone it.
I'm not sure if we've been here long enough for this to count as the second meeting in January yet either, so
A few more hours.
we're getting there.
Okay, so a motion from Mr. Osborne and a second from Mr. Hartley. If there's any other council discussion? If not, clerk, please call the roll.
Hartley?
Yes.
Nave?
Yes.
Osborne?
Yes.
Wingard?
Abstain.
Farnum?
Yes. The next item of our agenda, resolution requesting that the Virginia Department of Transportation add those streets identified on the Form U-1 to the urban highway system of the City of Bristol, Virginia for municipal maintenance payments. Nobody signed up for public comment for this item. Staff report.
Council, before you, you have a resolution requesting VDOT to add some streets identified on Form U1 to the urban highway system of the City of Bristol, Virginia for the municipal maintenance payments. These are newly constructed streets or segments or existing maintained streets not on the VDOT inventory would be added to the city's VDOT maintenance inventory list. You have Valley Drive, Transit Way, Cascade Drive. Total center lane miles is 0.3 that would be added. I believe this is something we do just about every year this time of year, just so that we can get VDOT funding for maintenance purposes.
Okay. Reading of the resolution.
A resolution of the City Council of the City of Bristol, Virginia, requesting the Virginia Department of Transportation add certain streets or segments to the city's urban highway system and to revise mileage for streets currently in the city's urban highway system for municipality maintenance payments. Whereas Section 33.2-319 of the Code of Virginia as amended authorize payments to cities and towns for maintenance of certain highways, and whereas the Virginia Department of Transportation has established procedures for the addition of certain streets for the purpose of maintenance payments, and whereas the City of Bristol has accepted .30 center lane miles or .60 moving lane miles of streets or street segments identified on the attached Form U1 into the city's system of highways for the purpose of maintenance. Whereas the City of Bristol has performed an audit of the streets currently in the city's urban highway system for municipality maintenance payments and has identified those streets that require revisions to the official street mileage for municipal maintenance payments on the attached street audit report. And now therefore be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Bristol, Virginia, meeting in regular session this 11th day of January 2022, petitions the Virginia Department of Transportation add those streets identified on the attached Form U1 to the urban highway system and to revise the mileage for the streets on the attached audit report currently in the city's urban highway system of the City of Bristol for municipal maintenance payments, adopted this the 11th day of January 2022.
Thank you. What's the pleasure of the council?
I move for approval of the resolution as presented.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Osborne, a second from Ms. Nave. Is there any council discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Hartley,
Yes.
Nave,
Yes.
Osborne,
Yes.
Wingard,
Yes.
Farnum.
Yes. The next item is the consent agenda. What's the pleasure of the council?
I move for the
The
approval.
council, I believe there is an amendment to make the item 1 of the agenda. That vote should have been a 3-2 vote, if I'm not mistaken, on,
Yeah, if you can,
so it's on the
the October 26 minutes.
Go ahead.
The approval of the consent agenda, which was item G. It was a 3-2 vote, not 5-0.
You want to go ahead and make the motion?
Yeah, well, I would approve, or move that we approve the consent agenda as presented with the change that I just mentioned, which would be changing the minutes of the October 26th meeting to reflect that the consent agenda was approved by 3-2 vote.
I second that.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Hartley,
Yes.
Nave,
Yes.
Osborne,
Yes.
Wingard,
Yes.
Farnum.
Yes. The next item is a closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711.A1 Code of Virginia 1950 as amended. Discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body, personnel, and pursuant to Section 2.2-3711.A7 Code of Virginia 1950 as amended, consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual or probable litigation, where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body, and consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, legal. What's the pleasure of the council?
I move that we enter into closed session for the reasons stated.
Second.
Okay. A motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Hartley,
Yes.
Nave,
Yes.
Osborne,
Yes.
Wingard,
No.
Farnum.
Yes. By roll call vote, council members certify that only business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements as specified in the motion to convene in executive session were discussed. Clerk?
Hartley,
Yes.
Nave,
Yes.
Osborne,
Yes.
Wingard's absent, Farnum.
Yes. That's the last item on our agenda. We stand adjourned.